Retcons can change a character's power set, their origin, and even the way we view them. In some ways for the better, and in many ways for the worse. Spider-Man is a character who has been plagued with a lot of misery in his life, and this has extended to the realm of retcons as well for him. Among some of the worst retcons that he's had is probably the one involving his marriage to Mary Jane, which was retconned out of existence after a plot where Mary Jane and Peter agreed to trade the existence of their marriage to Mephisto in exchange for saving Aunt May's life, which also had the added coincidental bonus of making Peter's identity as Spider-Man a secret once more. At the time, it wasn't a secret and everyone knew about it. But also, this sucked for a lot of us readers who were fans of the couple. For a while, I thought this relationship would be returned to us, with the end of Nick Spencer's run seemingly building towards that. But Zeb Wells, it seems, had other plans for MJ and Peter, unfortunately. Are there any ships that aren't together right now in the comics that you wish were happening, or any that loves that we've lost that you wish just came back? I love Oracle, but I don't really love the path we took to get to Oracle, if that makes sense. Batgirl is Barbara Gordon. Barbara Gordon is also known for being, in most continuities and stories, the daughter of Police Chief Commissioner Gordon, Batman's ally. Granted, most people don't know that Barbara herself is also Batman's ally and sidekick Batgirl. And when Barbara was targeted by the Joker, not even he knew this. In fact, he only targeted her because she was the daughter of the Commissioner, who happened to be at his home when Joker paid him a house call. As a result, Barbara was shot through the stomach, seemingly irreparably damaging her spine. Don't worry, she'd get better, because that's comics for you. And technically, this story wasn't even intended to be part of the main canon. The events take place in a story known as Batman the Killing Joke, but while the entire story was not made canon, the events of Barbara being shot were retroactively incorporated into the canon for some reason, leaving her paralyzed for a time. During this time, she took up the mantle of Oracle and became Batman's woman in the chair, a master hacker and a digital mastermind. That part I don't mind myself. Barbara as Oracle is still super cool, but the idea of this being the only part of the Killing Joke, her being shot, that was incorporated into the main canon, that I'm not a big fan of. What happened to Franklin Richards that he was ruined as a character? Well, many believe him being nerfed as a mutant totally ruined him. I'd also agree with this. I was holding out hope that his mutant status being revoked was part of a larger plot point, and that the overall story would eventually end with his mutant status being restored. But I've been waiting for some time, and my hope is starting to die out, alas. This change also means that all the fighting that happened over Franklin between the X-Men and the Fantastic Four basically just didn't matter. Joker is a character whose origin is plagued with retcons, plagued with them, one after the other. While I wouldn't say this, I know some believe that learning the origin of the Joker in Batman 3 Jokers was something that ruined the character for them. In fact, many folks would extend this back to when Batman, using the Mobius chair, learned the true identity of the Joker. Although really what he had learned, as we learn in 3 Jokers, was that there were multiple Jokers. That was the answer he got. To me, having multiple Jokers makes sense, though the idea that they were all selected and then forged in a soup of chemicals in a giant pool is pretty odd. This retcon might be a bit more controversial in terms of its inclusion here on my list. I'm sure some people are going to have strong feelings about me including this here, but I'm gonna keep going. Some people really love it, some people hate it. Me, I can actually see both sides overall. I'm personally kinda just more mixed on it, but that's enough for me to include it here. Hal Jordan is often celebrated as many readers' favorite version of Green Lantern, but he hasn't always been a hero in the comics. There was a time when he actually turned dark, but this was explained away by the fact that apparently, retroactively, Hal Jordan had been possessed by the fear entity known as Parallax for years, which is also why his temples turned gray. That's right, that's why his hair changed color. While I like that this helps to preserve Hal Jordan's image as a tried and true hero, because he wasn't really responsible for everything that happened, that he did that was bad, I do think this robs his character of some depth and agency in regards to that. After all, Hal had some reasons to go dark, and we could have just as easily explored that and then later set him down a redemption path. Especially considering Hal Jordan turning dark is one of the most interesting things to have ever happened to this character. Scarlet Witch is one of my all-time favorite characters from Marvel Comics. If you know me, if you've seen me, Amanda, host some videos, you know I've been a long-time fan of hers. I constantly talk about Wanda on this channel, and I constantly talk about the injustices that she has suffered. Chief among them are her retcons, with one big retcon summing up the greatest issue I have with how she has been characterized in recent years. That of course is the monumental shift in her origin from being a mutant to a non-mutant. Sad. This all went down as part of Axis, which honestly is such a weird event. Axis is kinda like just a mixed bag for me. There are some things I really love about it and other things that are just a mess or are just super weird, honestly. Friendly Neighborhood Carnage, I am looking at you here, but one of the messiest parts of that event for me is the fallout we get with Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch and their fake dad, Magneto. Here we learn when Wanda attempts to put a blood hex on her brother and her father that Magneto is not actually blood related to her, and ergo, is not the father. Of course, while this revelation for Wanda has always upset me, it does not end there. It extends to Quicksilver as well. Poor Quicksilver. He was really put in a weird position after this revelation. No longer a mutant, we'd find out he was somehow kind of an Inhuman, or his genes were like altered by the Inhuman process of Terrigenesis. It's a whole weird thing. Quicksilver gets depowered and then ends up getting his powers back through Terrigenesis, basically. And yes, I know what you're about to say. Isn't that just an Inhuman thing? Normally, yes. So does this mean that Quicksilver is an Inhuman? Overall, no, but also like kinda? I mean, he was married to an Inhuman and his daughter is an Inhuman, so like, I think they mostly just wanted a place to put him in terms of a camp other than, you know, Team Avengers camp. Also, this was at a time where Marvel still didn't have those X-Men rights, so Inhumans were still a thing that they were kind of trying to push and make cool because they didn't have film rights for the X-Men. The Inhumans are cool, by the way, they just aren't really the same as the X-Men in my opinion. So it was kind of just a weird push. Like, let the Inhumans be the Inhumans, let the X-Men be the X-Men. That's what I think. For those who aren't familiar with her, Holly Robinson was once known to be one of Catwoman's close friends. She was basically like a sister to Catwoman, although she wasn't exactly Catwoman's sister. Catwoman does have a sister and it's not Holly, it's Maggie. So Holly isn't her sister by blood, but she is her sister through the streets. Holly and Selina grew up in the same orphanage in the Prime Earth continuity, but in the previous New Earth continuity, they grew up on the streets together with Selina looking out for Holly as she would a younger sister. And yet it would later be revealed in the Prime Earth continuity, right around the time that Selina was set to marry Bruce, that Holly had actually been manipulating Selina into breaking off the marriage because she was secretly working for Bane. Okay, so this was more of a plot point and a bit less of a retcon, to be honest with you, but it was still a twist that was unexpected and that I didn't like. And I feel like surprise twists can have a very similar impact or feel to retcons, so I'm just gonna include it. It felt so out of character for Holly, honestly. Akin to Spider-Man's retcon woes, Gwen Stacy has had some of her own. This also extends to making Peter's life more miserable, as well as just making Peter kinda look like a superficial jerk in a way, with this specific retcon I'm about to talk about. What happened to Gwen? What is this retcon? Well, during Sins Past, we were given one of the worst retcons possibly ever, which involved Gwen having cheated on Peter with Norman Osborn, yeah, Green Goblin, and having given birth to twins, Norman Osborn's twins, that were born of their affair in secret. What? Thank goodness this was recently re-retconned away. Has been fixed, but still it's a retcon that happened. Power Girl's retcons have been numerous, and many of them have had to do with her origin and in some cases her powers. One of the most bizarre retcons she had was she was actually Atlantean. Yeah, very bizarre when you consider that she is normally known for being, of course, the cousin of Superman from an alternate reality than the main continuity. Also, there's a whole bunch of other weird stuff I could talk about with that, but you know, we're out of time.
At best, retcons can fix inconsistencies and bad storytelling in comics.
At worst, retcons can create inconsistencies and lead to bad storytelling in comics. Unfortunately, these are some of those. Number 10. Jean Grey was resting the whole time. After Jean Grey died as part of the Phoenix Saga, everyone was left flabbergasted. During the story, we'd seen Jean merge with the Phoenix Force, become insanely powerful, lose control over this power, become corrupted and dark, basically become a huge supervillain, and finally sacrifice herself, knowing that if she didn't, it would only end badly. Or worse than badly, because it was already pretty bad. Jean Grey, one of the original X-Men team, was dead. Or so it seemed. Later on, Marvel would want to revive the original X-Men team and bring them together on a new team and comic series called X-Factor. So Jean needed to come back to life. But hey, she was dead. So we got the added story to explain that the version of Jean that had died wasn't really her, but was a separate entity known as Phoenix. Sort of this merged thing. Wasn't really Jean. Jean herself was resting comfortably in a pod beneath the ocean. Still lived and would be able to return. Yay. Number 9. Tony Stark was adopted. Yep, that's a thing that happened. I'm just wondering if this one will show up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I can't deny that if we get an Arno as a result, an Arno Stark, I would actually not be too upset with that, even though this retcon's pretty weird. The reason this retcon was such a terrible retcon for Tony was that his parents and their loss always remained a great catalyst and huge emotional plot point for him. Now, of course, just because he was adopted doesn't mean that he can't still love his parents as much as he did and still be as emotionally affected by their death. That's not what I'm saying. But his parents also had a naturally born son that they hid from Tony, who was born before they adopted Tony, and he also didn't know that he was even adopted. Also, there were aliens and alien tech involved in Arno's birth, which explains why this all had to be a secret, but also it's just a lot. All in all, this revelation greatly changed the way Tony saw his parents and made their relationship more complex. And I don't know if either of those things needed to happen. Number 8. Hail Hydra. One of the most shocking moments in Marvel's comic history was when it was revealed that Captain America was actually a sleeper agent for Hydra the whole time. Say what? The guy who for years was diametrically opposed to Hydra and all their beliefs, who had tried and succeeded to foil their plots countless times, was a Hydra agent? How could this be? Well, apparently all those wins were a part of his doing a very good job to convince us all and trust him so that he could stab us in the back at the right moment and take over America, becoming Hydra Supreme. Fortunately, this evil version of Captain America would later be revealed to have been created by Kobik, a living sentient version of the Cosmic Cube who was manipulated into making this retcon happen. What's more, the true Captain America still existed within the shards of the Cosmic Cube and would return once more to defeat his evil self, fixing the timeline. So, I mean, at least this retcon ended up not staying permanent, but still, it's pretty weird. Number 7. Zorn. Okay, so I was actually going to make the title of this point a little more explanatory, but then I realized how long that would actually make the title of this point. Okay, so Zorn was basically a character who showed up in the comics who was a mutant who always needed to wear a mask. Because of this, we never saw Zorn's face, leading many to wonder who was really under the mask. Although I think most people just thought, well, it's probably a new mutant because, you know, we get new mutants added to the comics every day. But no, of course, this is comics, so it had to be someone. In a dramatic twist, it was Magneto. But no, of course, this is comics, so it had to be someone that we already knew. In a dramatic twist, it was revealed to be Magneto, who had infiltrated Xavier's school in order to rally up mutant support and help him create an army. He then destroyed New York, shot Emma Frost, killed Jean, and was eventually killed by Wolverine. Later on, however, Magneto would turn up again because, well, he's Magneto, and writers wanted to inch him closer to that line between villain and anti-hero again, so they basically retconned Magneto's involvement in all of this. It turns out there was a real Zorn, and it was actually Zorn's brother impersonating Zorn, impersonating Magneto, who was really to blame. Wow. Just wow. Number 6. Ugly equals evil. That's what Thanos' retcon taught us. Yep. Thanos' backstory was added in detail in the series Thanos Rising, and what many fans were surprised to learn was that his mother was apparently driven mad by her newborn baby's hideous appearance, and because of his appearance, claimed that she needed to kill him. That's pretty terrible. She sensed basically that because he was ugly, he would also be supremely evil. And the really shocking part of this was, of course, that she was right. But also, what the heck? Just because you don't like the look of your baby doesn't mean it should deserve to die. Fortunately, a retcon was later added to fix this when it was changed to it not being the baby's appearance but to a specific deviant gene in the child's genetic code that concerned both of his parents instead. Still, not great just analyzing your baby's genes and being like, we already know you're gonna be evil, but it's better than it just being about the ugliness in appearance as the pure reason for condemnation, I guess. Number 5. Doom is never wrong. Some people like Dr. Doom a little too much. I'm probably guilty as being one of those people. To the point that they can't let him be flawed. Doom must be perfect. Well, while Doom may believe that, the reality is it's his flaws that actually help to make him such a great character, and also are important because they are a part of the reason for his villainous nature. Originally, his vendetta started against the Fantastic Four, and more specifically Reed Richards, years ago, when Reed tried to give him pointers on a device he was building. Reed warned Doom that it was unstable, but Doom didn't listen. The device ended up exploding because, well, Richards had been right, scarring Doom's face. Unable to blame himself due to his huge ego, Doom decided to blame Reed, and thus a villain was born. However, retcons have come into play a few times in regards to his origins as to whose fault the device exploding really was. In one retcon, it's actually implied that it's Mephisto's fault, but if that's true, then why has Doom hated Reed so much for pretty much forever? Another retcon implied that Ben Grimm possibly intentionally sabotaged Doom's machine, which is an even worse retcon because it makes Grimm, normally a very lovable character, look like a jerk. Both of these retcons help to buff out Doom's flaws at the expense of making his feuds illogical. Number 4. Peter and MJ's marriage never happened. During the story One More Day, Peter made a pact with Mephisto to ensure that his Aunt May would live. Part of this deal was also that people would forget Peter's secret identity, which was currently out in the open. Although it wasn't like a bargain part of the deal, it was just a thing that would happen. But what did Mephisto want in return for this? Peter to never be a hero again? Did he want his soul? No. No, 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 no. He wanted his marriage? Mephisto wanted to take Peter's marriage to MJ. And by that, I don't mean that he wanted himself to marry MJ, which would actually make, in a weird turn of events, more sense. I mean, he wanted to make it so that their marriage never existed. This was such a strange request that many were left speechless when Peter agreed and this actually happened. What was likely really going on is that Marvel no longer wanted Peter to be married. Or Joe Quesada never wanted Peter to get married in the first place. They wanted to return to the days when Peter was flying free and single, so this story happened to erase it. Number 3. Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy's relationship. This little frightening retcon was added during the Sins Past story. It also made Peter look like an insensitive jerk, just for good measure as well. The story here that was added in was that Gwen Stacy had an affair with Norman Osborn, a man who was much older than her at the time and who would go on to be responsible for her death. This affair resulted in Gwen becoming pregnant with twins, which she secretly gave birth to. Norman then raised these children, lying to them that they were actually the children of Spider-Man and Gwen, and that Spider-Man had killed their mother, turning them into misguided villains. This was not a retcon anyone needed, but hey, it was one that we got. Number 2. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were never mutants. If you have been subscribers to our channel for a while, then you likely saw this one coming from a mile away. A list of the worst retcons with Amanda hosting it? I wonder what she's gonna rank high up on that list. And you were right. One of the worst retcons in mutant history for me will always be this. During the events of Axis, it was revealed that Wanda Maximoff and her brother Pyotr, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver respectively, were never the children of Magneto, and as such, never mutants. Instead, we learned that the High Evolutionary abducted them when they were young, experimented on them, and then disguised them as mutants and returned them back to the world. Why? Well, we don't really know, which is part of the reason this is such a terrible retcon. That, and it erased years of meaningful family drama and history, and created a bunch of plot points that no longer really made any sense. Number 1. Snap Wilson. Even worse than my own personal nerd rage towards the retcon of the Maximoff twins, everyone's outrage, my own included, against this retcon. I still can't believe this was a thing that even happened in the comics. Oh my goodness. Sam Wilson in the comics became a good friend of Captain America and was even known as his ally, the superhero Falcon. However, it was revealed that Sam Wilson wasn't actually Sam Wilson, a social worker from New York with falconry skills. This was all a fabrication of the Red Skull, who had used the Cosmic Cube to turn him into the perfect partner for Captain America as part of an insidious plot. The true persona of Wilson was the criminal, thug, and pimp known as Snap Wilson. What? This would be revealed to Cap as being his true persona, which Cap would then save him from. Yikes. Fortunately, years later we would see a retcon that would basically undo this one, turning the fake persona of Sam Wilson into the real persona for him, and the originally retconned real persona of Snap Wilson into the fake, meaning that Sam Wilson was always Sam Wilson and Snap Wilson was the version created and used by Red Skull. Whew, thank goodness.
As many of you probably know, Marvel seems to love doing this thing where they make you believe a character is a mutant for a very long time and then one day just randomly establish that they aren't and that they never were. Almost every time this happens, people hate it. Wolverine's Lupine era is another great example. Wolverine has been around forever and has been a mutant basically for as long as we've had him. That all changed in 2007 around issue 50 of Wolverine Volume 3. Well, for a little while there, Wolverine was a Lupine line, a human descended from wolves. Wolverine was told this by ancient evil Romulus and didn't take it well. I guess the good news is neither did fans. This retcon was received so poorly, Marvel did a double retcon to essentially fix it. In the later comic Wolverine Volume 2 number 312, Romulus' sister Remus ends up literally telling Wolverine that everything her brother said wasn't true and the lupine species was not actually real. Well, that takes care of that, I guess.
Next up, chaos magic. What is it, and was it ever real? After we learned that Wanda was tied to Chthon, over time the magic she used was also tied to him and her connection to the demonic powerhouse as a god. As the god of chaos, one of the titles that Chthon claims to have, this magic type became known as chaos magic. But there was also the issue of Wanda's initial origin. Wanda was first introduced as the Scarlet Witch back in X-Men, where she was teamed up with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. She was an evil mutant who had an unpredictable hex-based power set, often bringing bad luck to her opponents whenever she used her abilities, though not as in control of them as we now know her to be. She usually couldn't pick exactly what would happen, she'd just hex people and something bad would happen. So, which was she? Was she mutant or was she magic? Or was she some combo of these two things? That's kind of what chaos magic was considered to be for a while, a sort of combo of those two things, until Avengers Disassembled, when it was then established by Doctor Strange that chaos magic was no longer real. In fact, according to Strange, it never had been real. This was the reason he couldn't help Wanda or the Avengers during Avengers Disassembled or House of M. However, later still, chaos magic was then re-retconned back into existence as Wanda, now no longer considered a mutant, needed an exploration for her natural magical aptitude. Not only that, but chaos magic was then considered to be the oldest form of magic in all of existence, apparently, predating even Chthon. And apparently this is also sometimes why Doctor Strange didn't know about it, because it's so old, but you'd think as the Sorcerer Supreme, you would know that. Chthon apparently didn't create this magic, he simply used it, because that's how old it was. Wanda's link to Chthon, chaos magic, and the mystic arts through her family lineage were used to explain her innate power, especially because she's not a mutant, so whatever.
Poor Zorn was a victim of identity theft, but then not actually. Turns out he was the one committing identity fraud? We see Zorn for the first time in New X-Men Annual 2001 as Zorn, but it was all revealed at the end. Zorn was actually a vengeful Magneto using the Zorn identity to get closer to the X-Men. Turns out it was actually Zorn pretending to be Magneto, pretending to be Zorn, and Zorn was being controlled by someone named Sublime to foster mutant hatred in the world. So that's fun. At the end of the final battle, Zorn dies but then comes back because his essence was still connected to Sublime. Eventually though, he did disappear and his twin brother came to take over his place in the X-Men. He had all Zorn's powers and even had a mask like his. Marvel editors just really liked the character of Zorn and wanted him around permanently, whereas Marvel in general wanted Magneto back. It worked out well for everyone, well, except the storyline that Zorn originated in. Throughout it, there were hints everywhere that Zorn was actually Magneto, as that was always the intention. I guess they just mean nothing now.
Speaking of weird characters that we thought we know who they were, but then it turned out maybe we didn't know. Did you know that Spider-Man has a sister? Yep, he does. Well, sort of. I actually don't mind Spider-Man having a secret sister in the comics, that's not what I'm upset about here, and that being a big reveal. But what I did not like about this one was the fact that it wasn't super consistent, kinda like Zorn. It was like Marvel was afraid to fully commit, so near the end of this adventure with his supposed sister Teresa, it's implied that she might not actually be a sister at all, and that her origins are as of yet unconfirmed in that regard. But either way, Peter still confirms that he considers her his family regardless. Keeping it ambiguous is not my favorite when it comes to comic book family history, especially as someone that needs to keep track of that stuff.
Franklin Richards, son to Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman, has been having a bit of an identity crisis lately. First, he is a mutant and invited to Krakoa to be with the other mutants. Then he can't use the portal because he is not showing to be a mutant. Then we learn his dad, Mr. Fantastic, has made a device that masks his mutant gene, so eventually Franklin does end up on the island and he is a mutant again. But then, much later, after a big battle, he tries to come back, but he can't because he's not a mutant. It's hard enough to keep up with as a reader. Imagine that being your teenage years. Franklin is, or was, considered one of the strongest mutants ever, but if he uses his powers too much, it gets drained. Well, he did that, and his dad was trying to figure out what was wrong. When the X-Men extended Franklin's invite to the island, the Fantastics were thrilled, and they thought Franklin was too young to be leaving his family. There's a big fight in Washington Square between the Fantastic Four and X-Men over this kid, and it ends up being for nothing because he's not actually a mutant after all. Apparently, Franklin's powers were so strong that he unknowingly used them to make himself appear as a mutant, but when his powers are drained, he can't do that anymore, revealing his true nature. All that family and coworker drama and heartache for nothing.
This has to be one of the weirdest retcons here. There are a lot of weird ones in relation to House of M that happen in retrospect and which would have changed the perspective entirely of this event, but this one really gives almost all of them a run for their money. Well, it's a tie between this one and one other one on our list, but I'm gonna talk about that one later. This one went down in Children's Crusade, where Billy finds his spiritual mother Wanda in Latveria, where Scarlet Witch claims that she is head over heels in love with Dr. Doom, and is even betrothed to marry him. What? Another interesting point Billy learns is that Wanda seems to be suffering from amnesia here. Turns out that this was all seemingly part of a plot of Doom's to steal Wanda's power. However, it is also implied that the two did really have feelings for each other, despite Doom's claims that it was all a fervent sham, and that Wanda means nothing to him. In his anger, he even claims that she is so worthless, she wasn't even the true cause of House of M, and that it all actually happened due to his own machinations. That's right, he marches in there saying House of M was all me, baby. Interesting. I generally write this one off as Doom just being frustrated at the result of his plan not going to plan, as we still have yet to see any proof of Victor's claim here, I believe, but it is possible that this was meant to be taken literally and it was a retcon that was intended to absolve Wanda of her guilt. But at the same time, it also would kind of make much of the event feel hollow because Wanda was pushed to her actions due to her own trauma and hurt at that time, so it makes sense that she's behind House of M. And while I'm not condoning what she did, it did make sense for her character to lash out like she did. Hence why Doom being behind it all really makes no sense.
No matter which universe you look at, Iron Man is suffering. That's just the way of the worlds. In 2012's Iron Man 17, Tony gets some pretty serious news. Turns out he was adopted, and he already has enough daddy issues, but the revelation that has caused him to reevaluate his bond with his father, it didn't go over well. Maybe Howard wasn't the best dad to Tony because he secretly resented him for not being his biological son. The Starks' biological son was Arno, and he wasn't doing so well, so the Starks turned to Alien 451. The alien helped get Arno to term, but modified him in the process to wield the universe's most powerful suit of armor. That sounds familiar? The baby was born, but Howard had done some modifying of his own that made the baby's health decline. Who knows what would happen if 451 found out what Howard did, so the Starks needed a cover. Enter Tony. This is so sad. Tony was literally being adopted in a family not to be loved, but to be a decoy that is forced to live up to unattainable standards for his entire life. Eventually, Tony met 451 and tried and failed to pilot the armor. When he got back down to Earth, the ever-curious Tony looked into why he couldn't do it and found a tape in which Howard explained everything. Marvel, give Tony a break challenge level impossible.
What's interesting about a lot of retcons is that they are usually implemented by writers or creative teams who are different from the ones who established the initial canon for a character, which honestly makes sense. These are new creatives who either might not be aware of the established canon, might not like it, or might just want to change it up because they want to shake things up and have like a new vision for a character or just established lore. But this isn't always the case. Like with Genesis and her alter ego, the demonic entity Annihilation, during Ten of Swords. Genesis was revealed to be the retconned wife of Apocalypse, who also happened to be the one under the Mask of Annihilation or the Helm of Annihilation, possessed by the demonic Amenthi entity. However, by the end of Ten of Swords, we'd actually saved Genesis from her possession, with Saturnine transforming the Helm of Annihilation into a staff. The whole purpose of Saturnine doing this was to zap Annihilation's power somewhat, making it easier for the wielder to dominate and control this power instead of Annihilation possessing the wielder. This way, Genesis and the Iraqi mutants would have complete control over the Amenthi army without being possessed. But apparently, this was not actually what happened. In X-Men Red, issue number 12, Genesis is once more under the influence of Annihilation. Again, even though we just did this a few years ago, who, while unable to possess her, is considered to be more of a corrupting force now than ever before, apparently, in staff form. What's worse is this time Apocalypse also wasn't able to stop Genesis by defeating her in one-on-one combat, so Genesis seeks to conquer and invade Arakko. And Apocalypse, while warning and preparing Arakko, says that he's actually got to take a back seat for this one because he already lost in one-on-one combat, so therefore he can't fight again. Apparently that's a thing he does now.
We are back with my favorite, Tony Stark. It's time for his villain era, literally. Turns out for a while there in the 90s, 1990s, Tony was under the control of Kang the Conqueror. This all comes to light in Avengers: The Crossing. We don't actually know how long Tony has been under someone's control, but he's been deteriorating the lives of the Avengers for a while, causing financial instability and even going so far as offing people close to his teammates. It's definitely not a look we want to see for the Avenger. When he gets discovered by the other Avengers, there is of course a battle, but Iron Man is hard to beat. What do the Avengers do? They travel back in time and they get another Tony. Teenage Tony inspires evil Tony to become good again, and evil Tony sacrifices himself to save the day, becoming a hero again. This retcon already messed with Tony's character, but now it means that Tony is just really young for a while, until it's eventually, thankfully, fixed when all the Avengers died and then were revived by someone we have already seen, Mr. Franklin Richards, but specifically the version of him that Franklin knew best, meaning older Tony, but he's a good guy again. Most fans dislike this retcon for what it did to Iron Man, but it was also just confusing. Later on, Kang even confirmed that he was just trying to create confusion. Mission accomplished, dude.
Speaking of things that are confusing, especially in the modern light of day, this is the retcon that is tied for worst in the wake of the House of M aftermath. If you know me, you can guess what I'm about to say next. Say it with me. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are no longer mutants. What? Why? And how? Yes, because of the MCU, and because the High Evolutionary is basically a major creep who likes to experiment on mutant younglings. I don't know. This retcon took place during the Axis event, which I have honestly mixed feelings about. The event, not the retcon. While there are parts of Axis that I like, this is decidedly one of the parts that makes me question if it might actually be the worst event ever, because that is how much this retcon bothers me. It's not so much about losing Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch from the mutant group, although that does sting quite a bit, but it's about how this retcon made years of established family drama pointless. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were proven as not being mutants when we learned they weren't actually Magneto's kids after Wanda attempted to put a curse on her direct family. While Pietro was affected by this, Magneto was not. The good news is that during the Krakoan era, Magneto firmly established that he still thought of the twins, Wanda especially, as his children. Even though they weren't actually his kids by birth, they would always be considered a part of the Maximoff family tree. It's a nice gesture, but I still desperately want this retcon to be undone. Please, Marvel, please answer my pleas. Number 10. Hank Pym's secret daughter. Nadia Van Dyne is Hank's daughter, who we didn't know existed until 2016. She was introduced in a free comic book day issue about Civil War II. Now of course I like Nadia Van Dyne as a character, don't get me wrong, but her being added in retroactively as Hank's lost daughter was something that I felt like was a bit much. When we learned of Nadia's backstory, we learned that she was the daughter of Hank Pym and his first wife, Maria Travoia. Maria was kidnapped during her and Hank's honeymoon and killed. Nadia ended up being raised in Russia, trained in the Red Room. Eventually she escaped after learning of who her parents really were. By the time she got back to America though to see her father, Nadia learned of his sacrifice to save the world from Ultron and his death as a result. She decided to seek out her stepmother, Janet Van Dyne, and became close enough to her that she felt compelled to change her own last name to Van Dyne, because that's not confusing at all. She's Hank's daughter, she's not at all related to Janet, and yet she has her last name. Number 9. Falcon's X-Gene. Remember that time Falcon was revealed to be a mutant and then we explained that origin away with, a faulty Sentinel? If you don't, let me explain. In issue 174 of Captain America, we see Professor X meeting Falcon and Cap. Charles implied Falcon's connection to his bird seemed telepathic, and that Falcon's telepathic abilities may be mutant in origin. Falcon himself took this suggestion to heart and even considered what it might mean for him to be a mutant, pondering on his strong, seemingly psychic link to his bird Redwing. He then encountered a Sentinel who identified him as a mutant, and so he was a mutant for a time. This was established, and this wouldn't really be revisited or retouched till 2001, where the idea of Falcon being a mutant was tossed in the trash and explained away as a Sentinel simply malfunctioning. Wah wah wah. Number 8. Black Widow's confusing backstory. Natasha being a mysterious spy from Russia who switched sides means that yes, we are going to get a complex backstory for her, but it actually wasn't always that complex. Natasha was inspired to fight for her nation originally when her husband was assumed dead in combat. Her husband wasn't really dead of course, and it was implied that this was all part of a plot to basically encourage her to fight for her country. Before that, Natasha was a renowned ballerina. Later on, however, this whole origin was revealed to be a lie when we learned learned that the Red Room had embedded memories of her being a ballerina in her mind. They made her think she had trained in ballet, but she hadn't really, because I guess that's what the Red Room does. They mess with you and give you fake memories. Her story was also changed from a woman who was inspired by her husband's sacrifice to put her own life on the line for her country as well, to that of a woman being blackmailed and threatened into becoming a spy in order to protect her husband. Number 7. Professor X married Mystique. Some retcons that are really strange come from film inspiration. As a lot of people discussed in the comments, many feel that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, for example, would still be mutants today if it wasn't for their being introduced in the MCU's Avengers franchise, which didn't have the rights to include mutants, so we had to kind of unmutant them. I feel as though the case was possibly similar for this weird, secret retcon. In 2013's Uncanny X-Men issue 24, we learned of Mystique and Charles Xavier's secret marriage, meaning that the child we saw Mystique gave birth to while in the guise of Moira McTaggart was likely one willfully conceived, as opposed to Mystique tricking Charles into sleeping with her, which would have been super weird and pretty not good in my opinion. In the X-Men prequel films such as First Class, which came out in 2011, we see a different kind of relationship between Raven and Charles. We get this weird love triangle between Charles, Raven, and Eric, and it seems more of that likely influenced this weird retcon plot point revealed in the comics in Charles's will. Number 6. Thanos. Number 1 dad? Thanos has never really been known as a caring and kind person. Even the people he keeps close to him are never really fully safe from his wrath. Faithful servants, family members, to Thanos, everyone is pretty much disposable. The same could be said for his adopted daughter Gamora, who he hardened and transformed into a killer until she ended up later rebelling. In the 2019 Thanos series, however, we learn how Gamora's relationship with her father was, well, more complex. How he actually, in his own way, was kind of a good father to her. This series also highlights how much they both cared for each other, despite the fact that an Infinity Gauntlet, which happened in the 90s, pre this series, but in terms of continuity would have taken place after this, Thanos seems to not show any regard for his adopted daughter's life. So it's kind of a retcon. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Number 5. Spider-Man's non-sister. So this is kind of another retcon that for me is similar to Nadia's. I like the idea of this character, but the whole story involving her is, well, it's pretty wacky. Teresa showed up in Amazing Spider-Man Family Business claiming to be Teresa Parker, Peter's sister. She believed she was the daughter of Richard and Mary Parker, Peter's parents, and we got a few cool adventures with her, assuming this belief to be true. She was retconned into existence, but honestly, I thought she was kind of a cool retcon to add in, so I was cool with that. However, things got weirder when we learned that the secret sister we'd never heard of till now was all a lie, and that Teresa actually wasn't who she said she was, despite what she herself had been manipulated to believe. It was all a trick, and Mentalo had manipulated Teresa into believing it herself. It was all part of Kingpin's plan to basically lure Peter to a tomb. And we don't actually even know who Teresa's parents are now. It's still a mystery. They even manipulated how Peter saw Teresa, making her appear more like him, so she'd look more like his sister. It's weird. I wish she was actually his sister. That would have been cooler, I think. Number 4. Spider Destiny. Now you know me, I love the Spider-Verse, I love spider totems, but not all fans share my bizarre obsession with the Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon stories and the villains known as the Inheritors. I swear I'm like the only person that really loves the Inheritors. If you also love them, let me know in the comments. Show yourselves. With these stories came a pretty huge retcon, which basically implied via learning about the Great Web and the spider totems placed within it that every spider, man, or person had a kind of destiny to become that spider person. In other words, Peter Parker didn't have a freak accident, he was actually destined to become Spider-Man. It was fate! Many fans were not a fan of this change to his origins, as they felt it detracted from what makes Peter Parker so appealing, that he's just an average kid who got a freak spider bite that gave him powers, as opposed to it being all ordained. Number 3. Kang. Sometimes we talk about retcons that are ridiculous because they hurt the overall story. Other times there are retcons that feel like they don't really need to happen, and then there are those that just cause more confusion than really necessary. That's sort of the case with Kang. Kang the Conqueror was a villain who was first introduced in Avengers issue 8 in 1964. He is known for being a time-traveling villain who enjoys sitting and floating around while menacing other people. As time went on, however, we'd come to discover, due to the fact that he's a time traveler, the Kang was actually actually a bunch of other people, including Immortus and even Iron Lad. While these retcons were sometimes interesting, they don't really add much to his story, and at this point Kang being revealed as just about anyone is so old hat, it's kind of lost its shock value as well. Now we're gonna get him in the MCU. I don't know what that's gonna be like. Could be weird, could be great. Number 2, Aunt May's death. Remember when Aunt May died, but it wasn't really Aunt May but an actress who had actually died while impersonating Aunt May? Yeah, that was a weird villainous plot. What we saw in the comics as an elderly Aunt May's death was later retconned into being one of the weirdest and most elaborate plots of Green Goblin's criminal career. It was later revealed that the woman who was dead and buried and who we thought had been Aunt May was actually an elderly actress who happened to be on her deathbed and who had agreed to take on one last role in order to torment Spider-Man? Prove how great of an actress she was? Her motives are pretty foggy. Maybe Green Goblin agreed to pay any surviving relatives of hers a ton of cash? I honestly don't know. What had really happened was this actress had been genetically altered to exactly match Aunt May's genes, meaning no one at the hospital suspected this imposter to be a fake. She died after revealing to Peter that she knew he was Spider-Man and was even buried in Aunt May's intended plot next to Uncle Ben for a time. That is, of course, until we all learned that Aunt May was really still alive and this had been some kind of bizarre ruse. Number 1, Clone Saga. I won't deny that in my time on this channel I've come to actually somewhat love elements of the Clone Saga. I originally disliked Clone Saga when I started working here, but I very much have come to appreciate parts of the story and to acknowledge that without Clone Saga, we wouldn't have some very awesome characters like Ben Reilly and Kane Parker. However, one thing I still cannot get over is how long Marvel spent tricking everyone with this story. People spent 20 years thereabouts thinking they were reading Spider-Man, as in Peter Parker, only to find out that all those stories were not his, but actually belonged to a clone. Granted, at least it was a pretty cool clone who we'd all come to love after. But at the time, this was a pretty shocking and frustrating revelation after years of stories, and it left a lot of fans feeling betrayed at the time. Get ready to smash that reset button because it's time to talk about questionable and downright bad DC retcons. With the continuity constantly being reset, there are many to choose from, sadly. This retcon is about Damian Wayne and his origin. Although I like Damian Wayne, I do dislike the way he was written into existence, especially when we had a perfectly good explanation for him before the retconned origin or his birth, or really straight up creation, really is what it was. Before Damian Wayne's origin was explored officially in the comic book continuity, Batman and Talia had actually already conceived a child together. One that was kind of intended to be Damian, but at least that's what was implied in this story. Batman, son of the demon. In this story, Talia and Bruce come together because they kind of love one another and even are considered married when this happens. Their passion results in Talia conceiving a child who is hinted to have been given up for adoption at the end of the story, without Bruce seemingly knowing of this child's existence. However, this story, after being written by Mike W. Barr, was at the time not considered to be canon. I believe, but I'm not 100% sure, that DC had decided against it being canon after the fact. I'm not 100% sure on that though, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong there. Later though, in 2006, they had a change of heart and they actually wanted to see it modernized and incorporated into the main canon. And I thought, great, that sounds awesome. And Grant Morrison, who was writing Batman at the time, was tasked with this. I like Grant Morrison. However, while Damian was initially the natural born product of love in the original story, given up by Talia, possibly in the hopes that her child would have a better life, perhaps, I don't really know. In the 2006 version, Talia forces herself on Bruce and Damian is a test tube baby that she keeps in secret from Batman, only to drop young Damian on Batman's doorstep 8 years later after he was born. Yeah, a very different take on that story. A lot darker and a lot more like, what? I don't know what's worse for this retcon. Cassandra Cain being evil, or the retcon explaining how she was only evil because Deathstroke had brainwashed her using a substance that was only triggered by self-doubt he had helped to build inside her, thereby turning her evil. Say what? This all went down during, you guessed it, the New 52, where Cassandra's Batgirl book disappeared and in its place we got an evil Cassandra Cain who popped up in Robin. The retcon of this retcon, which honestly is also pretty awful in its own right, even though it's trying to undo something that's also really terrible, was from Titans. In case you want to go back and relive any of this magic. Oh, New 52, New 52. You know, to be honest, this one isn't all New 52's fault. I've always found Black Canary's origins to be a bit confusing, because she is either Dinah the Black Canary, daughter of Dinah, Black Canary, or she is Dinah, who killed a demon and was abandoned by her parents at a young age as her origin was randomly changed during the New 52 continuity, only to be once again changed to a combination of these two origins. Canary, you're making me want to cry. I have honestly mixed feelings about this next one, but I know it's a controversial retcon in comic book history, which is why I'm including it here. We're talking about the explanation for Hal Jordan's unhinged villainous turn as being explained by him being possessed by a fear entity, Parallax. The reason a lot of folks dislike this one is because they feel it actually takes away from the very real turmoil Hal was dealing with at the time, and undermines the trauma his character experiences. It also gives Hal a scapegoat for everything he does while under Parallax's evil influence, which, you know, I feel like you kinda need, but at the same time, would it be more interesting if it was just Hal and then he had to deal with all that stuff? Maybe. Another retcon that bothers me in terms of the way it was done is this next one, Jason Todd coming back to life. Now here's the thing, I like Jason Todd, I don't mind him returning from the dead and coming back and being Red Hood, all of that actually is pretty cool to me. But what I do mind is the idea of Jason coming back to life only really because Superboy Prime punched him back into existence. What am I talking about? Well, Superboy Prime was trapped in a prison constructed out of basically the Source Wall. The Source Wall in DC Comics, for those that don't know, is basically like the fabric of the universe and reality. It's physical and tangible, but also it's all of reality, so just try to figure that out in your mind. That's what it is. And while Superboy Prime was locked away in this prison, he decided to punch it in a rage. His punch was so powerful that he caused a ripple effect, with his punch extending across reality and altering things across time. One of these things, making it so Jason Todd never really died apparently. Well, he did die, he died for 6 months, but then he miraculously woke up in his coffin thanks to this punch. What a weird excuse for strange retcons DC wanted to make. If you've heard me talk about New 52 on this channel, you know I have a lot of feelings about it. I got a lot of complicated feelings. And specifically, one of the characters I feel mixed up about is Wonder Woman. Not just her either during the New 52 era and how she was depicted, which is honestly less of an issue to me, I think, but more how the Amazons were depicted and how Wonder Woman's origin was changed. That I feel feelings about. There are so many retcons that I have from the world of Batman that make me frustrated, and this is another one of them. It pertains to two beloved Batman characters. Spoiler, who for a time was also Robin, Stephanie Brown, and Batman's friend and ally, Dr. Leslie Tompkins. During War Games, Stephanie Brown ends up getting captured by Black Mask and ultimately is tormented by him before later dying from injuries caused by that torment and an interrogation session. Initially, Batman blames himself for this, having fired her as his Robin and also not getting her to medical care in time. But later in the follow-up story, Leslie is revealed to be the villain in that regard, with it being revealed that she allowed Stephanie to die to teach Batman a lesson about running around irresponsibly with kid sidekicks. I'm sorry, what? And it gets worse. Later still, it would be revealed that Leslie actually hadn't done this, but had swapped out Stephanie with a similar looking cadaver and faked Stephanie's death, instead to teach Batman just teach him a lesson. I don't know what's worse, but neither of these is a good look for Leslie. And also, it really messed with just Stephanie as well. When John Kent first came into the comics, we got to have some quality time with him as an infant and a kid and see him grow up, and it was super cute. It was super cool getting to see Superman and Lois as parents. During this time, he got to know Batman's also relatively new to the comics son, Damian Wayne, and while initially these two didn't get along, they actually became really good friends over time. When they started getting to know each other, they were around the same age, but this changed when John went off to space. During this time, John would age up because space travel, and when he returned to Earth, he'd be a teenager while Damian was still just a kid, putting a wedge between their previously established close bond, as now they were at different places in their lives. While they used to have a stronger connection, they are still friends, but both are at very different points, like I said, in their lives, so there's not a lot for them to relate to. With this retcon, gone were the short-lived days of Super Sons, unfortunately. And I don't know if we'll ever get them back. Although a lot of people have been talking online about how are we going to reverse that. I don't think we're gonna reverse that, but I like the optimism. Ick, ick, ick. That's all I have to say about this next retcon. It's so gross. Ugh. For a long time, it was one of the reasons I couldn't bring myself to appreciate Dick Grayson as Nightwing or as Robin. This story ruined his character for me, and it honestly took a while before I was ready to forgive him. I can't even comprehend how Babs ever was feeling. That's right, we're talking about the flashback during a stroll down memory lane where it was established in a Nightwing annual that Nightwing had cheated on his then fiancée, Starfire, with Barbara Gordon, after he'd gotten back from some space adventures. What's worse, he had actually come to check on Babs, but also to invite her to his and Starfire's wedding when they accidentally fell into bed together. Yikes. So you may have figured this out already at this point in this video, or if you know me, Amanda, you may have already figured it out a long time ago. When it comes to my thoughts on continuity resets, you may be thinking it's strange that while Amanda has talked about some of the changes made in New 52, she hasn't talked about the massive retcon as a whole. Well, my friends, I've been saving that sweet little nugget just for you. Ew, I can't believe I just said that. I'm sorry. Sweet little nugget. Anyways, yes, if you know me, you know one of my biggest complaints in regards to DC versus Marvel, let's say, is that I find the continuity at DC to be, at best, challenging to navigate. At worst, a complete freaking mess. Most days, I'd say, it's a mess, if you asked me, and a huge part of that is due to continuity resets. What is a continuity reset? Well, let's take New 52 for example. This one happened when we shifted continuities entirely, in essence resetting everything at day 0. Except, not really, because some series continued and were allowed to finish, bleeding into this restart point, making it even worse. And DC is very proud of its legacy numbering, so there are certain series, like Batman and Detective Comics, that have kind of mainly continued with their numbering, and Detective Comics I believe is now in the thousands in terms of issue numbering. I didn't mind all of the decisions necessarily that were made for characters during New 52, but that even for me is a mixed bag. What I did mind was just the idea of giving us a clean slate, because some characters had completely new origins, some characters had their old origins, some characters had some sort of combo weird thing happening. Now, when I talk about comics from before New 52, I have to specify that these are stories from the previous main continuity known as New Earth, and for fans of that era of comics, it technically means that their favorite canon stories aren't really exactly canon anymore. I mean, how weird is that?
Kicking off the list at number 10, Superman's Secret. Ooh, so in Superman issue 300 back in 1939, we see the front cover of this issue and it shows in big text, "Revealed at last, the startling secret of how Superman fools the world with his Clark Kent identity." And you see Superman on the cover like, "Lana, look at my face. Do you believe me?" He's on point, like he's very aggressive. He's like, "I'm Clark Kent, look at my face." It's basically what we've all been thinking when we see this guy in his disguise. The whole issue is about how dumb the glasses disguise is. And it's pretty funny at first. But the thing that sucked was that he explained how his glasses are made from Kryptonian plexiglass and how that intensifies the low-level hypnotic effect. So people see him as Clark Kent rather than Superman. So he can be dressed in his gear and people are like, "No, you're definitely Clark Kent. I'm looking right at you. Your chest is the size of a car, but you know what? I think you're still Clark Kent." It wasn't until Byrne's 1986 reboot until this power was dropped. Thankfully. Because if they had kept that idea, then it would have made the comics where Bruce Wayne pretends to be Superman pretty unnecessary. Also, if Superman has these powers in comics or movies, that would just be hilarious. It would just be Henry Cavill at the bar in his Superman gear just flexing, then a guy pours a beer on his head while we're just staring at him in costume. That would have just been weird. That guy should have been punched out to space also. Forget about his truck being stuck in trees. He should have grabbed him and just went, gone. Number 9, One Punch Man. Superboy Prime punches through reality itself. It is one of the most talked about events in DC's comic book history, and it has fans split over the overall decision. Crisis on Infinite Earths happened and brought together all these Golden Age and Silver Age heroes into the same place. It was a move made to retcon certain plot points while setting up a brighter and certainly bolder future. So what happens when you lock Superboy Prime up in a pocket universe? Well, once he's out, he gets so mad that he punches, but he doesn't just punch a hole in the wall like your classic Kyle from high school. No. He punches through reality, creating the multiverse, bringing back the dead Robin from the 80s, Jason Todd, to life. And that wasn't the only change though when it comes to the multiverse collapsing. Like Elastigirl's resurrection, and then the other characters come back as if they had truly never died. Like we had Lynx, Reactron, Ventriloquist, Scarface, and Magpie. This punch also changed some major history with Joe Chill, which I'll get into later. The numerous versions of General Zod were also replaced by just the one version. So, what a mess. Just what a mess. Number 8, Catwoman's origin. Okay, this one's super funny to me. So Frank Miller released Batman Year One, and it was this dark and gritty issue. And included with it had Selena Kyle's true origins. She lived life on the streets and resorted to work just to make ends meet. People loved this dark origin story. This was a superhero origin story. Then the New 52 released Catwoman Zero in 2011, and the origin went from dark and DC-like to just, well, this. She is seen as this amateur thief, and she has an epiphany while falling out of a window, and she smacks the ground quite hard. And then, out of nowhere, a group of stray cats appear and start to lick her back to life. Look at her face, getting all sticky. First of all, the sound. Second of all, the smell. Wouldn't be the best. Basically just doing what Tim Burton did, but on the page. No way. Number 7, after the New 52 retcon, we saw Barbara Gordon in an entirely new way. So Alan Moore released The Killing Joke, and in this comic we see a paralyzed Barbara Gordon from the waist down. She then became Oracle and did a pretty bang up job with the Bat family. Also, she's in a wheelchair. How often do you see that? More inclusion for the win, folks. Let's get it. But with the New 52 retcon, we have Barbara Gordon back as Batgirl. So while some fans are happy with the change, most have expressed quite a bit of rage online, rightfully so. Number 6, Identity Crisis. Brad Meltzer's Identity Crisis was a 7-part issue released back in 2004. The first issue actually did really well with pre-orders, passing I think like 160,000. But come issue 2, fans weren't nearly as interested the first time around. There was a huge decline in numbers. Why though? Well, the cruelty of the content was deemed a bit too much for comic book readers at the time. It had basically turned into a murder mystery about the death of Sue Dibney. Fans weren't on board with how dark the story got with certain details, some drawing the conclusion that it was done just for shock value. Fans have said that every character involved in that comic was just ruined. So what do you guys think? Agree, disagree? Comment down below. Number 5, Evil Amazons. Yeah, you heard that correctly. The New 52 comes through yet again to disappoint fans. The New 52 Wonder Woman series began in June 2016, and Brian Azzarello made the Amazons' origin so that they attacked sailors on the high seas that were too close to their land. Okay, and if that wasn't bad enough, Azzarello even went so far as to make the Amazons murder these sailors and then toss their bodies in the water. And if they have any sons, well, those sons are being sold right into slavery. I don't think we'll be seeing this in the Wonder Woman sequel. I mean, maybe? Imagine if they went from like the first movie to like a band of hardcore pirates just whipping people off boats. Get out of town. The Wonder Woman Clay origin was preferred over the new stuff. These false memories that were written to her story were liked. I mean, rightfully so. Number 4, What is Love? More like, Where is Love? Green Arrow and Black Canary are an iconic couple, or rather, were. The two have been together since their early issues in the 60s, and then the reboot came along in 2011, and they weren't lovers anymore. What? For 5 years, readers had to watch them not be in love, and it was a weird time. Eventually, DC listened, and then when DC Rebirth happened, the couple was back together again. Now, this made fans happy, of course, but that was 5 years of storytelling, and now those issues are just scrapped. Awesome, sick, 5 years. A lot of words, a lot of eye movements. Thanks. Number 3, Dead or Alive. Superboy issue 158 came out in 1949, so it was a little while back now. And the cover of the issue is enough to pull any reader in. It shows Superboy in space looking down at a capsule with his parents in it. And the words, "They're alive, my real mother and father." And behold, a couple of sleeping beauties. Jor-El and Lara were drifting in space for 15 years. The radio transmission comes in, calling Kal-El, and then he's like, yo, that's my name, let's do it, let's go. And it's a nice moment or two. Superboy reflects on recognizing his parents' voices, even though he was just a wee baby when he last saw them. So how sweet. But in the New 52 Rebirth storylines, apparently Jor-El survived the Krypton explosion, thanks to Dr. Manhattan, and he then became Mr. Oz, who was like a villain. This New 52 retcon makes absolute no sense. We saw Krypton's death, and we also saw his parents dying in it, with our eyes. Number 2, Jack and Joe. We all know the name Joe Chill, the guy who killed Bruce Wayne's parents, Martha and Thomas Wayne. Now, after watching the 1989 Tim Burton Batman film, there's now another name in our minds when we think of the person that killed his parents. We of course think back to the Joker, and having him as the one who killed his parents in the movie. So which is the right one? Which one's true? So fans had to wonder this for years. If Joe Chill was actually the killer, these are confusing times. And then in Infinite Crisis issue 6, we see that Chill is again the killer of the Wayne's family. Thankfully, I mean, part of Batman's story was based off this way of things. And after Infinite Crisis, they made it so Chill was arrested the same night he killed Bruce Wayne's parents. These stories are way too confusing at times. Even reading this, my brain hurts. And finally, number 1, no kill. We all know Batman by his one rule, and breaking that rule is Joker's goal in the Dark Knight film, to never kill. Of course, having his parents die at the hands of a killer, one would assume he's not too fond of the act. But let's go back. Let's go back to Batman's first appearance. Back in 1939, Detective Comics issue 27, we straight up see Bruce push a guy into acid. Acid! It's said in the early days that many criminals died by the hands of the Bat. Bill Finger came in and retconned it, so the Caped Crusader, starting in Batman issue 6, tells Robin that we never kill with weapons of any kind. With weapons? Ooh, gotta read the fine print, I don't know. No, Batman at that point still goes by the no kill rule. But what do you guys think? Was his actions, like in Batman vs Superman, unwarranted? I mean, this is obviously a darker, older version of the Batman where clearly people close to him have died. I personally think he should kill. Make it so he pops dudes. People love the Punisher. I mean, you know, he wrecks people. Go get him, Batsy.
Retcons, retroactive continuity, changing continuity after it literally already happened. It happens to everyone, even the X-Men. Some retcons we love, some we kinda hate, but let's be honest, the ones we hate are just straight up more fun to talk about. We're starting off our list light with a bit of a silly little retcon that seemed to be entirely pointless. Chris Claremont's run on the New Mutants is praised for its awesome character work and the cool locations the team goes to. For example, we got the introduction of the character Magma, who came from the long-forgotten Roman colony known as Nova Roma. Nova Roma was super cool because it was a society that had changed very little since the days of the Roman Empire. However, after Chris left, X-Men villain Selene changed that. Also hailing from Nova Roma, Selene revealed that she had in reality brainwashed everyone into thinking that Nova Roma was real, while the whole thing was just a big, dumb, elaborate hoax. However, like a boss, when Chris Claremont later returned to the X-Books, he changed things again so that the hoax was part of another bigger hoax instead, and he made it so Nova Roma was back to what he originally had created. Now, I kind of like this next retcon, but there is no denying it does Professor X pretty dirty. Yeah, we are talking about Deadly Genesis. Professor X assembled the all-new, all-different X-Men after the Krakoan attack on the original X-Men. Cyclops was the key survivor of that attack, and he escaped, found Xavier, and requested additional aid. From there, Xavier recruited Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, etc. as his all-new X-Men. However, there was another. Professor X had actually made up an entirely different team which included Cyclops' long-lost brother, Vulcan, and he sent them on the rescue mission way underprepared with no real experience before he sent his new X-Men team. That entire team was decimated. That's bad enough for Xavier, but then you take into account that Professor X then mind-wiped Cyclops of the events and covered it all up. It made the character of Professor Xavier far less heroic than traditionally perceived. It also brought about an entirely new cast of characters and gave Cyclops even more reason to become just a smidge bit more unhinged. But morally dubious Professor Xavier kinda works really well. I like it. The Decimation. It's a huge event in the X-Men canon. This is when the Scarlet Witch wished away the X gene completely when she said no more mutants, and the next decade of X-Men comics centered on that decision. With just 198 mutants left and no more mutants being born anymore, mutants were on the edge of extinction. Obviously, the mutants absolutely hated Wanda for this, and for good reason, but alas, all was not as it seemed. The Scarlet Witch's involvement was soon altered in Avengers: The Children's Crusade, as the X-Men discovered that Victor Von Doom was secretly behind the decimation. Sure, the X-Men still hated the Scarlet Witch for a long time after, again, rightfully so, but the comics removed some of her blame for the situation. It was a serious change given how important the decimation was for the X-Men. The Dark Phoenix saga was landmark. That story set the precedent that even longtime X-Men, some of the most loved characters, weren't beyond being corrupted and turned into the bad guy. Not only that, but they could also cause problems for the entire galaxy and wipe out countless lives. We saw Jean Grey get overcome by the Phoenix Force's power, attack her friends, and destroy a world before sacrificing herself to save everyone. Yes, well, not really. Before long, the X-Men comics revealed Jean was actually chilling out in a cocoon at the bottom of Jamaica Bay. That Jean Grey that did all those incredibly horrible things? That Jeannie McBeanie? That wasn't Jean at all. Instead, it was revealed that it was actually the Phoenix Force which had taken on the physical form of Jean Grey. The real Jean never did the horrible things the Phoenix did. On one hand, we got Jean Grey back. On the other hand, the change completely uprooted the Dark Phoenix's saga's message and legacy, which ticked off a lot of fans. Next up on our list is, kind of a weird one. Bit of a strange fellow. It's also incredibly small in the grand scheme of things. Oh, and it's also 100% unnecessary and just weird and was done purely for shock factor storytelling. Sentry Fallen Sun is a comic that depicts the funeral for the Sentry after he was taken down by Thor during the Siege event. A whole bunch of superheroes are at his funeral. The Fantastic Four, Daredevil, Tony Stark, Cyclops, Rogue, and Emma Frost, Doctor Strange, they are all giving their thoughts and prayers saying nice things about Sentry. Thor even goes and dances with Sentry's mom. It's wholesome. But then we have Rogue. Rogue tries to say her piece. She talks about how she went for a long time without being able to touch somebody, except for the Sentry, who was the only person who could hug her. And then she gets like overwhelmed and runs off crying. And then, in a little under the breath moment between Johnny Storm and Cyclops, it's basically implied that Rogue and Sentry had, you know, they did the thing. It's just so random and so unnecessary and really out of place. Speaking of random, unnecessary, out of place, and romance, following the untimely passing of Professor Charles Xavier at the hands of his own golden boy Cyclops, who was possessed by the Phoenix Force during the Avengers vs. X-Men event, Xavier's last will and testament are read out by Jennifer Walters' She-Hulk to a room full of mourning listeners. In Uncanny X-Men number 24, fittingly titled The Last Will and Testament of Charles Xavier, Jen reveals to the room of At Odds X-Men that at some point in Xavier's past, he not just loved, but actually married Raven Darkholme, better known as Mystique. As you can imagine, almost every single person in that room was shocked and confused. He then went on to tell them about the most powerful mutant any of them had ever seen, and they had to go deal with that. But Professor X married Mystique, so I guess that kind of makes him Nightcrawler's stepdaddy, which is weird. Speaking of which, it's common knowledge to most readers by now that Nightcrawler is the son of Mystique, something that was revealed and confirmed ages ago in 1994. To cut the story short, Mystique was posing as a German woman and became the wife of a very wealthy and regular human man. After giving birth to a very much not normal human mutant child in the form of Nightcrawler and exposing herself as a mutant during labor, she ran away, abandoning baby Nightcrawler. It was later revealed that Kurt's odd appearance wasn't just due to Mystique being another blue mutant, but was actually due to his real father, which by the way was not the human man. Kurt's biological father is actually Azazel, a member of an interdimensional group of ancient demon-like mutants. To maintain his presence on Earth, Azazel basically makes babies every few years. The children are then used as anchors to keep him aligned to our world. This retcon changed Nightcrawler's origin, sure, but it also gave him a ton of siblings, and it also, inexplicably, changed another X-Men as well, Angel. Angel was now a descendant of an equally ancient offshoot of mutants, but instead of having a demonic appearance, they possessed angelic qualities. Oh, so cool. I hate it. Now personally, I am a fan of this next retcon. So after having the adamantium forcibly ripped out of his body by Magneto in X-Men number 25 volume 2, Wolverine came to learn that his claws were actually made of bone and are a part of his mutation. This revelation came alongside a whole bunch of other things that the traumatic events had on Logan, but funnily enough, this small little fact of his claws being natural was large enough to blow a hole in several Wolverine stories where he specifically talks about not having claws before getting involved with the Weapon X program. In the past, there were actual panels of Wolverine having his adamantium bonded to his skeleton, and it was heavily implied that the claws were implanted alongside all of it. Now, of course, Marvel waved this off with the unreliability of his fragmented memories, but funnily enough, it started a whole thing of uncovering Wolverine's past, which led to him being well over 100 years old, having his real name be James Howlett, not Logan, as he thought it was. So, it's not entirely negative, but there's no negatives here. From the day of Lucas Bishop's debut in Uncanny X-Men, he was a good guy. Righteous, self-sacrificing, a literal man of the law from the future. He had a huge degree of integrity, and unlike a lot of other characters, he never seemed to waver on that, which is why, when we saw his sudden and drastic change to brutal villainy, most fans were left flabbergasted even if the explanation was clear and out in the open. Now, we knew that Bishop came to the main 616 timeline to stop what was commonly referred to as the X-Traitor. At first, he thought it was Gambit, then after Onslaught, he thought maybe it was Xavier, but then 10 years later, after having never mentioned her or anything like her before, Bishop decided once and for all that it was actually the first baby born since M-Day, Hope Summers. The child would soon be adopted by Cable, and Bishop set out to send the sweet fresh mutant back to the Shadow Realm. Bishop nearly took the life of Professor X, someone he committed to protecting, and he slaughtered the entire population of a future version of Earth just to cut down on the places that Cable and Hope could run to. The Messiah story arc was honestly loved by so many people, it's kind of super awesome, but the heel turn in Bishop's personality was then explained away as being him being possessed by a demon bear. What does that even mean? Now, last up for the day, after Cassandra Nova, the insanely powerful twin of Professor X, leveled the mutant city of Genosha, Magneto was nowhere to be found, and thus, he was presumed to have bit the dust in the attack. But then, the new X-Men member, Zorn, revealed that he was actually Magneto in disguise. Whoa, crazy, cool. What's not so cool was that upon the reveal, Magneto destroyed the X-Mansion and attacked New York City, taking a lot of people's lives and making a lot more people his prisoners. Now, obviously, the X-Men eventually triumph, but not before Magneto fatally injures Jean Grey with a, quote, planetary scale stroke. It's stupid, but for that crime, Wolverine relieved Magneto of his head. So that's Magneto gone for good, right? Nuh-uh-uh. Once the writer of the story, Grant Morrison, finished his run, Marvel brought both Magneto and Zorn back, and even revealed that there was actually two Zorns. The Zorn that the X-Men had come to know wasn't actually Magneto at all, but an imposter, and the new Zorn was that one's brother. So, Magneto was cleared of wiping out hundreds of thousands of people this one time, and that made it okay for the supervillain to become one of the X-Men.
Number 10, the Three Jokers. At the bottom of our list is the Three Jokers story. This is because it isn't canon to the main DC universe, but the setup is. When Batman became the god of knowledge by sitting on the Mobius chair, he became able to find out the answer to any question he asked. One of the first things he wanted to know was the true identity of his archenemy, the Joker. To his surprise, the chair informed him that the Joker was actually 3 different men. This was never really explored in main continuity, but in the Black Label story The Three Jokers, we learned that the reason the Joker acts so differently depending on the day is that Batman has been dealing with 3 different Jokers, known as the Clown, who was the Joker who killed Jason Todd, the Comedian, the Joker who shot and paralyzed Barbara Gordon, and the Criminal, who seems to be the Golden Age version of the character. The writer, Jeff Johns, stated that it was because it was so revolutionary, it would be out of canon with the option of bringing it into the main universe once fans inevitably loved it. Comparing his story to Alan Moore's The Killing Killing Joke, which went through a similar process. Personally, I think it's best this stays in Elseworlds, as it just opens up too many questions about Batman's already kinda weird continuity.
Number 9. Martian Manhunter. Put some respect on my boy's name. In the New 52 era, one of the biggest changes made to the Justice League was that Martian Manhunter was not a founding member of the team, a place that he held for years. Instead, his spot was taken by Cyborg, who was now created thanks to a mother box. This had a ripple effect of changing the important place Cyborg held in the Teen Titans, meaning it was erased completely. I personally liked the change a little bit. I always have felt that Cyborg has been a little underappreciated, so to make him a founding member felt like a huge step up for his character, who is one of my favorites. But at the same time, John is also one of my favorites. It's just that his status as a newly arrived alien from Mars made it make more sense that Cyborg, who has lived a relatively normal human life on Earth, should be the one of the original defenders of the planet. It may be a weak argument, and I know that many people weren't too happy with the changes to both the JLA and the Titans. Let me know your thoughts.
Number 8. Hal Jordan, from hero to villain to host. Hal Jordan was one of the most beloved and respected members of the Green Lantern Corps. When his home, Coast City, was destroyed by supervillains, he was consumed by grief. He tried to recreate his city and its inhabitants with his ring, but as this was against the ring rules, he was summoned by the Guardians of the Universe for judgment. He snapped and killed pretty much the entire Green Lantern Corps, taking their rings in hopes of becoming so powerful that he could restart the universe and save his city. He started calling himself Parallax and was now a villain. He eventually learned the error of his ways and sacrificed himself to save the day and died. DC eventually wanted to bring him back as Green Lantern, but realized that would be really hard with him having committed so much genocide since he was a hero. They retconned it so that he was actually being influenced by a yellow fear demon named Parallax who had taken over his mind. This allowed Hal to rejoin the Green Lanterns, be a member of the Justice League, and become the Lantern's golden boy again by absolving him of any responsibility for his actions.
Number 7. The Justice Society. One of the most hated retcons to come out of the New 52 was that DC made it so that the Justice Society of America, a well-respected team that included popular characters from the golden age of comics, that was a huge part of DC's comic book history, both in the actual continuity and real life, had just never existed. It's just such an odd choice, as the legacy aspect of DC Comics that these characters served as the basis for was just completely wiped out. That legacy concept had done so well for DC prior to the past decade, so it seemed like such a strange choice to make. DC made a few weird choices with regards to retcons created during the New 52. Some were loved, some were not, but to fans, this one seemed just straight up rude. Just because Jay Garrick and Alan Scott are old news doesn't mean they aren't as important. Respect your elders, DC. Come on!
Number 6. Tim Drake. Robin no more? When the DC universe rebooted into the New 52 continuity, DC editorial wanted to make their heroes younger and changed the continuity so that the Justice League had only been operating for 5 years. If they had wanted to start the New 52 with Batman working solo or with Dick Grayson still being Robin, this probably would have worked. But DC wanted to have their cake and eat it too, wanting a younger Batman, but still wanting to use characters like Nightwing and Jason Todd. In order to accommodate the new timeline, retcons to the various Robins' backstories had to be made. Dick and Jason got away relatively unscathed, but Tim Drake got the short end of the stick. Tim was originally introduced after Jason Todd had died at the hands of the Joker. Batman was acting recklessly, and Tim deduced that Batman was Bruce Wayne. Believing that Batman needs a Robin to temper his aggression, he asked Dick to become Robin again, but ended up getting the gig himself, being the main boy wonder from 1990 until 2009 when Damian Wayne became the new Robin and Tim Drake became Red Robin. In New 52 canon, he never quite figured out Batman's identity and was never Robin, having apparently always been Red Robin. Fans hated this, and his original origin was eventually put back into canon. Another consequence of the New 52 was that in order to explain how Batman had a 10-year-old son, Damian was retconned to be a genetically engineered baby who had grown faster than normal.
Number 5. Identity. Identity Crisis was a really engaging mystery story that paid great close attention to comic book history, but unfortunately it is another one of DC's strange retconning events that changed quite a few things that left readers completely flabbergasted. Whether it was the super unnecessary and inappropriate use of Dr. Light's attack on Sue Dibney, which itself was an example of the crappy way women were treated in comic book stories in order to motivate the male hero, aka fridging, or the Justice League approved mind wipes that seemed kind of evil in the grand scheme of things. Sure, wiping Dr. Light's mind and turning him into essentially an idiot for what he did maybe seemed darkly justified, but wiping Batman as well? It caused Bruce to create the Brother MK1 satellite, which eventually became Brother I and created the OMAX. Catwoman also suspected that her personality shift from villain to basically a hero might not have been her own choice. It caused the villain community to band together over the fear of being mind-wiped, leading Lex Luthor to create the Society, and it even caused the falling apart of the Justice League. Also, can DC stop calling every damn event a crisis? I am in crisis just trying to keep track of them all.
Number 4. Jay Garrick. Fictional or nah? When Barry Allen was introduced in 1956 as a reinvention of the Flash, they explained that in Barry's universe, the original Flash, Jay Garrick, and all of his adventures were the fictional exploits of a comic book superhero that Barry liked growing up. So when Barry got powers, he took on the identity to honor him, making the Flash a cosplayer. This was retconned in the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story from 1961's Flash number 123, where Barry accidentally was transported to Jay's world. He learned that Jay was in a different universe, and that the comics written by Gardner Fox were actually dreams that he had remembered and written down. As Barry explained, obviously when the writer was asleep, his mind was turned in on Jay's vibratory Earth. This was a weird way to incorporate Jay Garrick, but it also had long-running effects on the larger DC universe, as this is also the introduction of the DC multiverse.
Number 3. Jason Todd. Ah, yes, the over-aggressive black sheep of the Bat family, the poster boy for toxic Batman fans everywhere, and the most lazily written Robin of the bunch. At least at first. When Jason Todd first showed up on the scene, after the Robin mantle was abandoned by Dick Grayson, it was downhill from the start. For starters, DC made his backstory almost identical to that of Dick himself. Jason was part of a circus that was attacked by Killer Croc, which resulted in the passing of his parents, and that is when Batman took him under his wing and trained him to be Robin. This time it's the Killer Croc's fault. Very original, DC. I see what you did there. Very nice, yes. So already this Robin seemed to be the target of Batman for being exactly like his beloved Dick Grayson, but Jason wasn't Grayson, obviously. In a retcon, he was made to be impulsive, reckless, and rageful, probably because his mentor wanted the old guy back. I'd be mad too. Now, his backstory was reworked to make him a tough street kid whose parents succumbed to a life of crime and substances, but that's not the weird retcon. After his passing at the hands of the Joker, and technically at the hands of the fans, and after his resurrection as the Red Hood, he revealed to his sidekick that the cause of his streak of white hair was the fact that Batman had made the young Robin dye his hair from red to black in order to make him look more like Dick and avoid anyone asking about this new Robin's identity. Sure, it makes some sense, but my god, Batman needs to learn how to be a better Bat Dad. Number 2. Punching reality. In one of DC Comics' first and largest moves, the publisher removed all of the parallel Earths that they created during the Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age of comics in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was controversial even at the time, as it was a huge move that was meant to streamline their continuity and bring everything into one Earth. Unfortunately, the whole move was pretty pointless because it didn't take DC long to go back on that idea and retcon it, but they did it in what was honestly an incredibly odd way. We're talking comic books here, so there is a large suspension of disbelief that needs to take place, but making Superboy Prime punch reality just seems on another level. Being from an alternate reality himself, he got so mad at the current state of affairs in the DC universe that he punched a hole in reality, which created the multiverse again and started the incredibly complex history of DC continuity, which only recently was reverted so that literally everything is canon if you want it to be. We did a whole explained on the DC continuity, so if you want to check that out, we will add a link for you right somewhere over here.
Number 1. Hawkman's origin. Hawkman has one of the most notoriously difficult origins to keep track of in all of comics, so I will be giving you an abridged version of his history. In his original 1940 origin, he is Egyptian royalty who has been reincarnated throughout time as a variety of different heroes before eventually becoming the archaeologist Carter Hall, spelled like this. Carter becomes Hawkman and fights crime. With me so far? When reintroduced in 1961, he is an alien cop from the planet Thanagar named Carter Hall, spelt like this. He comes to Earth and takes on the secret identity of an archaeologist named Carter Hall, with the original spelling. It makes sense when you think of him as a total reinvention of the original character. Where things start to get confusing is 2 years later when we learn that the two different versions are actually multiversal variants of each other, with the alien living on Earth 1 and the original archaeologist being on Earth 2. In 1986, the Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, and all of the worlds are combined into one. How to handle the continuity? Well, They changed it so that they were two different people who just happened to have similar sounding names and were both Hawkman at different points in history, with the original operating in the 40s and the alien operating in the 80s. In 1994, 0 Hour happens and all of the various Hawkmen become one guy, but it doesn't stick. In 2011, the New 52 retcons Hawkman so that he has always been a space cop from Thanagar. In 2017, Carter with a C is reintroduced, with it being explained that he reincarnates because the knife he was killed with in Egypt was made of nth metal from a Thanagarian ship, kind of introducing elements of both of the origins. In 2018, we learned that the two versions have become one again, with the space cop being one of Carter with a C's reincarnations, retconning the character to be able to be reborn not just in different eras on Earth, but on other planets as well. So, to sum it up briefly, reincarnated Pharaoh becomes space cop, becomes two different people. He's retconned to have only ever been a space cop, and is retconned one last time to be a reincarnated Pharaoh who in one of his lives was an alien space cop. Which, when you say it like that, makes perfect sense. By the way, most of this can also be applied to Hawkgirl.
Comic book retcons are a really interesting concept. They have the ability to be the coolest thing ever, or they have the ability to completely turn away an entire fanbase and ruin entire characters and arcs. We're gonna talk about the best of both worlds. Starting with Avengers 1 Million. Introduced in Marvel Legacy #1 over 1 million years ago, the early human mutant known as Firehair became the avatar of the Phoenix Force and nearly destroyed the entire planet. Now, realizing that that's bad, and that she wasn't the only one capable of that level of power, she began assembling a team of supernatural and mystical beings to protect humanity and Earth. The eventual team was made up of the Asgardian god Odin Bor's son, the demigod sorcerer Agamotto, the Black Panther of the Panther tribe, the woolly mammoth riding Ghost Rider, Iron Fist Fan Fei, and a super smart caveman who wielded the Star Brand, which made him look surprisingly like the Hulk, but red. Now, after fighting some corrupted Celestials as well as time-traveling villains from the present like Thanos, multiple Doctor Dooms, and Mephisto, the team eventually disbanded. Now, I personally think it's really awesome. Like, the concept is just super cool. The only problem is that given the actual history of the Earth, and the history of some of the characters involved, and a whole bunch of things, actually it doesn't really make any sense. But whatever, man, there's a Ghost Rider riding a woolly mammoth. Sign me up, I'm there. But moving on, 2019's House of X #2 revealed that Moira McTaggart had been a completely detectable mutant all along and had lived numerous lives already. This was because Moira's newly revealed mutant power was reincarnation, sort of. Basically, when Moira died, her consciousness would reincarnate in the past when she was still in her mother's tummy, thus allowing her to retain all of the memories of all of her different previous lives, but allowing her to modify the course of her life as she wished with all the prior information about how things went last time. So through this power, Moira had a total of 10 lives. While she was at the beginning a super loving and caring person, over time and over the course of her different lives, she began to hate mutants and began hating her own powers, which led her to try and create a mutant cure during the 3rd life. She tried to change her ways in the 4th, 5th, and 6th lives, but then got fed up and tried to take out the Trask bloodline in her 7th life. She then tried helping Magneto and Apocalypse in her 8th and 9th lives, and then in her 10th life, she pretended to be loving and caring while secretly plotting to depower the entire mutant population. While all of that ranks among the absolutely biggest twists in Marvel Comics history, Moira's ultimate goal also completely shifted from saving and helping mutants to destroying them entirely after Mystique and Destiny stripped her of her mutant powers, and she came back for an 11th time as a cyborg allying herself with Orchis during the fall of X. Next up, Robert Reynolds, or as I like to call him, Bob, was granted the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns after consuming the Golden Century Serum, which was an offshoot of the original Super Soldier Serum, except like 100,000 times more powerful. He used his powers for the greater good of all and put together a costume to make his debut as the Sentry. He was the example of what a hero should be. He had connections to Iron Man, was active during the years just prior to Fantastic Four's emergence, he became a role model for Spider-Man as well as an ally to the X-Men and equal to Reed Richards and a friend to the Hulk. The Sentry battled alongside the Fantastic Four and defeated his greatest enemy, the General, with the help of the X-Men. Except, we had actually never seen the Sentry in Marvel Comics till Sentry #1 in July of 2000. That's because of Sentry's darker half, the Void, one of the most evil and destructive forces in the universe. The existence of the Void drove Sentry to team up with Doctor Strange and Reed Richards to erase the memory of Sentry from themselves and even the entire world. So really, Sentry had been around since before any of our favorite heroes had ever debuted. It actually worked really well, which we can't say of all the retcons on this list. For example, next up we are talking about the awful couple of Hawkeye and Mockingbird. This whole relationship honestly sort of seems like a cheap way of capitalizing on the Green Arrow and Black Canary coupling that DC had going on. But these two were nowhere near as compatible as their DC counterparts. The best example of that would be the whole thing surrounding a guy called Phantom Rider. To sum it all up, Mockingbird is caught and physically mistreated by the Phantom Rider, and so in turn, she eventually gets her revenge, taking the Rider's life. Now Hawkeye, instead of supporting his traumatized partner, is scared off by the fact that she took the life of her assailant, and he dumps her. Now while that really makes no sense considering Hawkeye's colorful past and the fact that she took the life of someone who did something absolutely horrible to her, it all got retconned. Now the story changed so that Mockingbird actually consented to do the jiggy with Phantom Rider, which means she then took his life for seemingly no reason at all. On top of that though, instead of leaving it so that Hawkeye dumping her for taking a life for no reason makes a bit more sense, Hawkeye now just used the passing of Phantom Rider as the excuse to break up with her when the real reason was because she had actually cheated. Now look, they didn't talk about this next point in part 1, and this story will forever haunt my psyche. So next up is the Spider-Man story, Sin's Past. This story contains within its strange pages the revelation that Gwen Stacy, former lover and a teenager, was having an ongoing affair with Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, a very, very creepy full-grown man, old enough to be her father. Not only was she having the affair, it even resulted with Gwen secretly giving birth to twins. Twins that Gwen threatened to keep from Norman, which became the new reason that Green Goblin tried to take her out. Twins that were half Green Goblin and grew up at a faster rate, and twins that became a pair of assassins and came to New York to attack Spider-Man. I do not recommend reading this story at all, because all you will be able to see when you close your eyes at night going forward is the incredibly creepy image of Norman and his Green Goblin face as he's laying on top of Gwen Stacy. But on to brighter and better things. Jean Grey's death in the Dark Phoenix saga remains among the most shocking passings in Marvel Comics history. Her sacrifice remains an unforgettable moment for many fans, despite the fact that Fantastic Four number 286 retconned it out of existence. Issue 286 established that instead of the Phoenix Force becoming one with Jean Grey and influencing her decisions throughout the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas, it turns out that the Jean Grey we saw wasn't Jean Grey at all, but was instead the Phoenix Force itself impersonating Jean Grey. The Jean Grey we all knew and loved was actually in stasis, in a cocoon, by the Phoenix Force at the bottom of Jamaica Bay, which is where her space shuttle crashed Uncanny X-Men number 101, and where she was reborn into the Phoenix originally. This brought the fan favorite character back to life, but devalued a large amount of the significance of the whole Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas for fans, and it made people start to hate Jim Shooter, Marvel's editor-in-chief at the time. Next up is Hydra Cap. The Marvel story Secret Empire introduced the idea that Captain America, the beacon of hope and the one who always did the right thing, was secretly this whole time undercover Hydra super soldier. This Hydra Cap organized the second superhuman civil war as well as a Chitauri invasion on the Earth. He got promoted to director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and influenced the legislation of the S.H.I.E.L.D. Act, which gave S.H.I.E.L.D. way more authority. He then used that new power to basically organize a Hydra takeover of America itself. Steve Rogers revealed himself as not only a long-time Hydra defector, but the Hydra Supreme. He allied himself with a new Madam Hydra, took advantage of a global catastrophe to seize control over the world's governments, and helped Hydra make its move. Hydra, who had seriously infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. at the time, began assuming control of key locations and executing anyone who stood in their way. The reveal of Captain America as a longtime Hydra agent completely took readers by surprise and even a bit of anger. Marvel realized and even admitted to their mistake, and so the story got retconned to have it so that the character known as Cubic, who was essentially a living cosmic cube in the form of a child, was manipulated by Hydra to create a Captain America who grew up being loyal to Hydra. This Hydra Cap would eventually supplant the real Captain America of Earth 616 till the true Captain America came back and beat the snot out of him. Hydra Cap then became an actually really good villain, and Marvel has actually found a way to use the Hydra Cap again, with him recently returning under the guise of Captain Krakoa in the Fall of X storyline. But speaking of mutants, in Giant Size X-Men number 1, Charles Xavier puts together a brand new team thanks to the fact that his original original X group was being held captive by the living island Krakoa. However, we later learned that this new team wasn't the only one, cause Professor X already sent another new squad of X-Men to save his original team, and they were all horribly killed. X-Men Deadly Genesis revealed that Professor X had put together a backup team of X-Men made up of Sway, Darwin, Petra, and the newly revealed and teased at third Summers brother, Vulcan. This new team all seemed to perish at the hands of Krakoa, and rather than admit to his poor decision making that got a bunch of mutants AIA and taking responsibility for it all, Charles Xavier instead just erased the minds of everyone who knew about this team, including wiping the entire memory of Vulcan from his older brother Cyclops' memory. Xavier then put together a new X-Men team that debuted in 1974's Giant Size X-Men #1. As it was, this whole thing came back to bite Xavier in the butt big way when it turned out that Vulcan hadn't actually passed away at all. Now, sticking with the X-Men and mutants, the Mutant Massacre storyline was one of the biggest X-Men storylines of the 80s. This crossover involved evil marauders slaughtering hundreds of sewer-dwelling mutants known as Morlocks before finally being defeated by the X-Men. It's not really a complicated story, but Marvel added new layers to Mutant Massacre by retroactively inserting several characters into the story who hadn't been conceived of by Marvel creators at the time the story came out. Basically, readers would learn that the Mutant Massacre was orchestrated by Mr. Sinister because many of the Morlocks were created by his rival, Dark Beast. Sinister felt his own work was being perverted by Dark Beast, and more than that, it was revealed that Gambit was hired to lead the Marauders straight to their prey. Despite his remorse though, that revelation severely damaged Gambit's reputation as an X-Man. And last up for today, for the longest time, Bucky Barnes was one of the few comic book characters that appeared would actually remain deceased alongside Captain Marvel of the Kree. Initially believed to have perished on a mission alongside Captain America, crashing while on an experimental rocket while Cap himself went plunging into the depths and got frozen into a popsicle with a squishy center. But Bucky was, in actuality, captured and subjected to intense brainwashing by the USSR. When Marvel relaunched the Captain Marvel comics in 2004 under Ed Brubaker and Steve Epting, they brought in the Winter Soldier, one of the deadliest assassins in the Marvel Universe, capable of going toe-to-toe with Captain America himself. And it wasn't long before Cap came to the horrified realization that his new enemy was none other than his former sidekick. Bucky's time as a ruthless brainwashed assassin was colored by dark deeds and pretty chilling action. He came into contact with tons of characters like Nick Fury or Black Widow, who he helped train, and he even ended the life of Wolverine's wife, Itsu. This dark past would haunt him for a very long time after he returned to the side of the heroes. Now, while Bucky has rejoined the ranks of heroes, the shadow of his time as the Winter Soldier just continues to cast a long, pretty haunting presence over his character.
Number 10. Gwen's secret children. Norman Osborn slept with Gwen, and they had twins in secret together. Shocking? You bet it was. But that is exactly what happened in this very strange retcon from Sin's past. It featured a reveal as well that Peter Parker was not in fact Gwen's first, which seemingly broke Pete's heart, despite the fact that it's been, years since Gwen has been alive at this point, and the fact that it's kind of just a weird thing to focus on, honestly, when it comes to this revelation. Especially when it comes to the caveat that your dead ex also apparently had twins in secret with one of your greatest enemies, and the person who ultimately, kind of killed her. I mean, you could say that Spider-Man killed her. You can debate that all you want, but I think Norman's presence was pretty crucial in that. And now, those twins have grown up, and they also think that you're their father and that you're responsible for their mother's death. So, all in all, just a weird thing for Pete to focus on, and just a very weird retcon in general. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here, and if you love when I get to smash the retcon button and talk about retcons, be sure to smash that like button to let us know you like it. Number 9. Kindred's Revelation. As weird as the previous retcon from Sin's past was, the good news is it's been retconned out of existence. Aha! This all happened during the end of Nick Spencer's run on The Amazing Spider-Man on ASM. In ASM issue number 73, which I honestly just collected because of this, it's explained to Norman by his son Harry, or I guess his son's vengeful kind of new demonic form, that Harry teamed up with Mendel Stromm and Mysterio when he was still alive to create an extremely convincing illusion, making it seem as though Norman had slept with Gwen when he actually hadn't. Gabriel Jill and Sarah Stacy were actually not anyone's children, but simply test tube clones created based off of Norman and Gwen's combined genes. Kind of a weird retcon, but also kind of a great one. Number 8. Black Widow's origins. Black Widow used to be a ballerina. Or at least she used to be. Initially, Black Widow's origins was that she was a ballerina who married the Russian super soldier superhero Red Guardian, and after he went MIA and was basically presumed dead, getting blowed up, she decided to join up and fight for her country, inspired and impassioned into patriotic dedication by his sacrifice and unfortunate fate. However, it turned out that he never really died, but that Russia had it appear as though he did in order to manipulate Natasha into becoming one of their agents. However, then it was retconned that Natasha never really even was a ballerina at all, but merely these had been memories implanted into her mind by the Red Room, whom she was in the care of actually for most of her life, at least according to one of the accounts of the various versions of her origins. It's also been implied that she was not actually inspired to join up with the USSR following the supposed death of her husband, but instead was blackmailed into doing so. Basically, her origin is one that we seem to constantly revisit and tweak, so it's kinda hard to keep up with. To be honest, I kinda wish she had actually just got to be a real former ballerina turned spy, because that just sounds like a cool origin story to me, but hey, implanted memories. Number 7. Aranya's powers. Aranya is Anya Corazon. For those who are unfamiliar with her character, she is another Spider-Man-like superhero from Earth 616. Despite sharing some connection to the world of spider totems and spider-like abilities, Anya was actually a pretty unique character in the sense that her power origins were more steeped in mysticism and magic. She was given her powers and her heroic calling after saving Miguel Lagar, a sorcerer from the Spider Society. She didn't get a radioactive spider bite, she got a magical spider tattoo. Anya had powers that gave her superhuman reflexes, wall crawling abilities, and super strength, but she also had a spider-like exoskeleton that she could produce, acting like a shield around her. She also had a power known as the Spirit of the Hunter, which kind of sent her into like a berserker rage. And because of her ties to the Spider Society, she was also extremely helpful when it came to reading prophetic scrolls that the Spider Army got a hold of during the Spider-Verse event. However, during Spider Island, her powers shifted to be basically just another carbon copy of Peter's instead, with her basically not having her original powers and then her just getting like Spider-Man's powers. Although at least now with Edge and End of the Spider-Verse, Anya does seem to be recovering her original powers, so they are coming back, but it was a weird retcon, and I was just like, but it actually ties into the spider totem thing. Doesn't that make more sense? Spider totems are their own thing. Number 6. Franklin's origins. Franklin Richards is the son of Susan Storm Richards and Reed Richards. He is a member of the Fantastic Four and Future Foundation family, alongside his sister Valeria. While Valeria doesn't possess any superpowers of her own, at least not yet, although she is insanely smart, one of the smartest people in the Marvel Universe in fact, Franklin actually does have superpowers. Or he did. His powers are considered to be off the charts, or you know, at least they were. Franklin Richards had insanely powerful reality warping abilities that had been causing bouts of chaos, while also sometimes being insanely useful, ever since he was a baby. It was also believed that these powers were the result of him having an active and powerful mutant gene. However, as Franklin's powers recently struggled to remain consistent and eventually faded with time, he not only lost the powers, but he also lost his mutant status, which was revealed to be a result of him subconsciously reality warping his own DNA. This has made a lot of Fantastic Four fans upset, but also I'm still hoping it's leading us to something else. I'm still hoping it won't be a retcon forever and that something will shift. Maybe they had to do that because Franklin's going to be coming to the MCU and they were like, he can't be this powerful. We must nerf him in the comics. Number 5. Teresa Parker. Who is Teresa Parker? Honestly, after everything we've learned about her, that's a really great question, but one that isn't easy to answer. Initially, Teresa appeared in a non-canonical story, but ended up later being brought into the 616 continuity. There she was introduced as the possible mystery daughter of Mary and Richard Parker. Her birth being kept secret after the death of her potential parents, Teresa would be adopted and later would end up as a member of the CIA. As an adult, even she was unsure of her true parentage. It is implied, however, that she was the secret daughter of Mary and Richard, which would make her Peter's Teresa's strange sister. Eventually, her and Peter meet and even team up, but after we seemingly have somewhat confirmed her status as a Parker, although even that origin was still pretty shaky, it was later re-retconned that indeed she might not be. Chameleon attempted to manipulate Teresa, offering her alternative origins and even at one point suggesting that she may have come from the Chameleon Academy and be one of their own sleeper agents. Regardless though, Teresa addressed all the confusion of her origins by simply stating that regardless of her natural born parentage, she would always consider herself a Parker. So hey, at least there's that. Does that make it any clearer? No, but at least we know where Teresa feels she stands. I think that's important. Number 4, spider totems. I explain them a lot on this channel whenever we talk about them because honestly, they're kind of weird and most people are like, what's that? What's a spider totem? To be fair, I do personally love what they have done as a concept for the Spider-Verse, basically bringing together like all the alternate versions of Spider-Man. So there's that, and I think that is a good part of them. So, okay, what are spider totems? Where did they come from? Why? Why? Well, spider totems are basically characters who are attached to the great web of life and destiny, who themselves are imbued with fated, spider-like powers thanks to their connection to, in essence, kinda like spider gods, who each represent a different archetype. With the concept of spider totems, Spider-Man and other related characters with spider-like abilities went from being heroes as the result of a freak, radioactive, accidental spider bite, or some other, freak occurrence, to becoming heroes of destiny and fate. Some people like it, some people don't. But it is a thing that exists, and we must acknowledge. Number 3, Mr. Sinister's obsession. This has to be one of the weirdest retcons around. Although, I'm gonna be honest, I do kinda like this one. Mr. Sinister has always been known for being obsessed with the Summers family, especially Scott. This is seemingly because from a genetic standpoint, Scott Summers and his brothers have the most potential, with Sinister often believing that Scott's genes are actually the key to unlocking the most powerful mutant of all time. Typically, Sinister is a shipper of Scott and Jean together, and even went so far as to create a clone of Jean named Madeline Pryor to ship Scott with after Jean was believed to have died following the Dark Phoenix saga. I do not know where Mr. Sinister stands on the whole Emma Scott ship, however. In Sinister's own origin story as Nathaniel Essex, we later learn that this obsession with Jean and Scott together started before he was even Mr. Sinister really, with him meeting them when they traveled back to the past during a mission given to them by Clan Ascani. So basically, Sinister's obsession with Cyclops is kind of like a time paradox, because he met them as Nathaniel Essex before he met them as Mr. Sinister, but meeting them in their future, his past, made him obsessed with them in his future, their past. Number 2, Silk and Spider-Man. This is a really weird one, but thank goodness we've moved past it at this point, and even Dan Slott has admitted remorse for this weird plot point that was added into Silk's origins, as well as some other initial elements of her character that played into racial stereotypes. He has openly stated that if he even could go back in time, knowing what he knows now and hearing what he's heard from readers, he would have written things a lot differently. Honestly, a refreshing take to hear from a writer when it comes to a weird retcon that was not positively received. Silk is Cindy Moon. She was bitten by the same radioactive spider as Peter and also received spider-like abilities. Due to her and Peter sharing the connection of the same spider, which gave them their powers, she and Peter, for some pheromonal reason, had an uncontrollable desire for and attraction to one another. And I really do mean uncontrollable here. All in all, it was a weird thing that was pretty icky, to be honest, but fortunately we moved past that, and the connection no longer makes either spider-based superhero act like a horn dog around the other, so yay. Progress. Number 1, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver's origins. Well, if you know me, you knew that we were going to talk about this because I must talk about it at every opportunity. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver have had a tumultuous origins, to say the least. Initially, they were the children of Maria and Django Maximoff, who became indebted to Magneto as young mutants after their lives were saved from an angry mob. Quicksilver's mutant powers allowed him to move and think at super speed, and Scarlet Witch's powerful but unpredictable unpredictable mutant powers allowed her to hex her enemies, and sometimes honestly her allies, even warping reality at times to do so. They were initially portrayed as kinda bad luck powers in the comics, but would evolve to become more seemingly magical, being referred to as chaos magic, and also becoming powerful enough to allow her to warp the reality of an entire universe. We'd learn eventually that the Maximoff twins were not truly the children of the Maximoffs, but were simply adopted by the couple. They were the secret twins of Magda, Magneto's wife, making them, yes, Magneto's children. This would create a tense and interesting relationship between the three, with their family ties shaping much of their personality, complexes, and history throughout the years, and adding a lot of depth to Magneto's character. However, Marvel wanted to bring these two into the MCU. At the time, this was complicated, as Wanda and Pietro were mutants, which put them in a weird contested limbo, with Fox claiming rights to them due to them owning X-Men rights at the time, and Marvel claiming rights to them for film projects due to their frequent attachment to the Avengers, and you know, they've never really been X-Men, so yeah. In order to make it so that Marvel could easily use the twins without it being contested in the MCU, they decided to detach them even further from mutant kind by retconning their origins during the events of Axis, with her alignment accidentally magically reversed as a result of a spell she herself had helped to cast. Wanda used blood magic to torment her own relatives, Quicksilver and Magneto, who were basically trying to talk her down at the time. While this worked on Pietro, it did not work on Eric, proving that he was not really their father. The High Evolutionary provided further clarification in regards to this retcon, with it being explained that the Maximoffs were actually their real parents, with the High Evolutionary merely disguising them as mutants after abducting them and experimenting on them while they were young, which also granted them their powers. Later, Quicksilver would be implied to also possibly be an Inhuman, and Scarlet Witch's powers would be firmly cemented as straight up magic strengthened by her own Romani bloodline and heritage. So nothing mutant about either of them, apparently. So House of M, Avengers vs. X-Men, there's a lot of things that now don't quite make sense.
The Scarlet Witch has been a part of Avengers stories much more than she was a part of mutant-related stories. Quicksilver, on the other hand, has had more activity within the X-books. Them being twins makes them inseparable if a change in their parents is made. It has been definitively established many years ago that Magneto was their dad, with the initial reveal being reinforced numerous times over the years, as well as the status of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver being mutants also being reinforced. But after Quicksilver ended up being used in Avengers and the X-Men films, it was time to do something about the twins being mutants. It was then revealed that the High Evolutionary had actually messed with their genetics, something which had been established in the past, and that they never had X genes. This completely contradicts past established events, including the then relatively recent Avengers vs. X-Men event when Hope Summers used her mutant powers to mimic mutant abilities of others to join with the Scarlet Witch to defeat the Phoenix Force by saying no more Phoenix. Now that Disney owns Fox and the rights to the X-Men and mutants in general, they could go back and re-retcon Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver as mutants again, and all that it would really do is create another lie that the High Evolutionary told, having a number of other retcons that have happened in the past being related to lies he has told, which have been a lot. Batman has many iconic villains. All of them stick out in their own individual ways, but there is a strong case to say that Mr. Freeze may actually be one of the most iconic. It may be due to his appearance in the Batman cartoons, because in the animated series, Mr. Freeze was given an incredibly understandable motive to commit crime than a lot of other Batman villains get, saving the life of his wife. His wife was dying of a disease, and he is keeping her frozen until he can find a cure, committing crimes to aid his research. It's so understandable that while Batman still attempts to stop Freeze, he finds himself empathizing with the villain in a way that he doesn't with a lot of his other villains. So it came as a shock to a lot of people when the New 52 came about and Scott Snyder retconned the continuity so that Mr. Freeze's beloved Nora Freeze became Nora Fields, and Mr. Freeze had actually never even met her while she was alive. This made Mr. Freeze into just another madman, but one obsessed with a random woman kept on ice at Wayne Enterprises. As you can imagine, people were not very happy about this one. In Marvel Comics, the Infinity Stones used to be these awesome, powerful artifacts representing the sum total of all the fundamental forces of the universe, or the multiverse at one point, and were the ultimate secret that Thanos uncovered while gazing into the Infinity Well. They came from before recorded time as part of a being of limitless power that existed before everything else that then destroyed itself to create the universe. You collect these stones and boom, you're super omnipotently powerful. But in the 2018-2019 series Infinity Wars, it was revealed that actually, no. In what I would say is the climax of the series, Loki uses an assembled set of Infinity Stones to transport himself to the unknown realm that existed beneath the Quarry of Creation, where he found a group of Celestials that guarded the deposit of Infinity Stones. Basically, with this retcon, the Infinity Stones are mined by these Celestials, and that this place contains countless Infinity Stones which get sent to other universes by the Celestials. It's just kind of dumb if you ask me. It makes the stones appear so much less important or powerful. On the charts of cosmic entities, the Celestials are actually pretty low in the ladder, and they're the ones who are responsible for the stones? Kinda boring. I don't like it. Get out of here. Get out of here with that. When looking at characters with tons and tons of retcons, Marvel's Wolverine easily tops the charts. His retcons have retcons. One of the most hated of these retcons is the Lupin. In Jeff Loeb and Simone Bianchi's Wolverine number 50 from 2007, Wolverine started having dreams of a mysterious figure known as Romulus. Romulus was thousands of years old and had been manipulating Wolverine before he was born. Cool. That's fine. What was less fine was when Romulus made it appear as though Wolverine was not a mutant at all, but was actually a completely different species of sapien called the lupine sapien. Men evolved from wolves. Now, the actual idea of this could be seen as kind of cool, but to make Wolverine himself into one of the Lupin Sapiens was kind of dumb and super problematic, as it conflicted with a lot of established lore, especially Wolverine's origins when his mutant power activated in the traumatic event of his not father's shooting. Sabretooth as a Lupin, or Romulus himself as a Lupin, all those other feral looking characters in Marvel, sure, that could be actually pretty cool, but not Wolverine, man. Like I said, his retcons have retcons, and this one was pretty quickly undone by Remus revealing that it was all a lie and that Romulus was trying to create the Lupin instead, which I don't know if that's better, but there you go. Now look, there is no way to do a list like this and not talk about sins past. There is no silver lining here, there's no positive here, there's only gross, stupid, and confusing here. Basically, two twin assassins show up in New York on the trail of Spider-Man, and to cut a sucky story short, these twins were actually the secret children of Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn. Apparently the reason that Goblin threw Gwen Stacy off of a bridge all the way back in the day was not because he wanted to mess with Peter Parker. It was actually because he wanted to hide the fact that Gwen had recently given birth to Norman's little baby twins and was threatening to not let Norman see them again. And of course, Gwen is forced to go through with it, which I'll remind you, she showed no signs of being pregnant at all, and she gives birth to twins. It's weird. Also, because of Norman's irradiated genetics, these twins age really quickly and develop Green Goblin abilities. Basically, Marvel decided that ruining the image and importance of Gwen Stacy and her passing was worth it to create an extremely overcomplicated arc that goes nowhere and adds nothing but ickiness to the Spider-Man continuity. I can never look at Norman's face without seeing that face, and you know what I'm talking about. Luckily, this was retconned as well, so. When it comes to DC Comics, there are far too many retcons to speak about that fans hated. A lot of disliked retcons came about during their huge reboot known as the New 52, which rewrote a lot of origins. One hero whose origin got rewritten to suck was Wonder Woman. First of all, the New 52 changed the Amazons from being benevolent isolationists to more aggressive xenophobes. That's no bueno. Then it was revealed that Wonder Woman herself is now the daughter of Zeus. Now, while you could argue that this is an interesting take, it just pulls a lot away from the character, and DC didn't even do anything with it. Originally, Diana didn't have any men involved in her origin, except for the god Hermes, who was one of her patrons, and of course Steve Trevor. The New 52 Diana explicitly derives her power from and owes her existence to a man, rather than being from blessings from largely goddesses. And on top of that, if you look at Greek mythology, it's a man who's pretty awful to women. Zeus slept around a lot, man. Like a lot. But it just didn't serve any constructive purpose, which kinda sucks. Avengers Disassembled and House of M are arguably some of the worst things a superhero has ever done. But for Scarlet Witch, the one who did it all, it was the result of years and years of trauma for the character that reached ahead and pushed her to wipe out her fellow Avengers and depower the vast majority of an entire entire race of people after changing reality itself. However, Marvel didn't want to actually make Wanda responsible for what she did. That would make her too human and fallible, and they also couldn't use her for a vast majority of stories since everyone basically saw her as a villain now. So, Avengers The Children's Crusade retconned the whole thing. Instead of making Scarlet Witch's breakdown the fault of her years of trauma, it was changed to explain that, working with Dr. Doom, she channeled the Life Force to try and reincarnate her children. Power of the Life Force coursing through her drove her crazy, and that's why she had a breakdown. It's just kinda such a cop-out. I don't like it. Next up, the Punisher has always been an incredibly controversial character for Marvel Comics, and that's never been surprising. His MO is extremely bloodthirsty, and his comics have some of the most brutal imagery in all of Marvel. The Punisher's instantly identifiable skull symbol in recent years has also been adopted by some misguided members of law enforcement and also appropriated by certain political groups, which is a topic I'd like to avoid as much as possible. That's almost certainly one of the big reasons why he's been sidelined by Marvel the past couple of years, but more recently, the Punisher series established a new status quo where Frank Castle is now an enforcer of the Hand, and with that came a big change to his symbol, shifting from his classic skull to the image of an Oni. And while that annoyed people who had adopted this symbol, the first issue of the story also revealed that one of the reasons he had shifted to become a warlord of the Hand was because they had resurrected his wife, Maria. Now eventually, it was also revealed that Frank Castle's family wasn't as happy as some might have thought, with Maria almost taking his life now, and later admitting that she wanted a divorce from him the day of her passing, and that his entire crusade on crime was basically disrespecting her and their children, not honoring them like he thought. Basically, Marvel made it clear that Frank is not a good guy, but most of us kind of already knew that. Identity Crisis was a really engaging mystery story that paid great close attention to comic book history, but unfortunately, it's another one of DC's strange retconning events that changed quite a few things that left readers completely flabbergasted. From the super unnecessary use of Dr. Light's attack on Sue Dibney, which was just another example of fridging, to the Justice League approved mind wipes that seemed kind of evil in the grand scheme of things, there were just some interesting choices made here. Sure, wiping Dr. Light's mind and turning him into essentially an idiot for what he did maybe seemed darkly justified, but wiping Batman's memory as well? It eventually caused Bruce to create the Brother MK1 satellite, which eventually became Brother Eye and created the Omax. Catwoman also suspected that her personality shift from villain to basically a hero might not have been her own choice, and it caused the villain community to band together over the fear of being mind wiped, leading Lex Luthor to create the Society, and it even caused the falling apart of the Justice League eventually. It's just not a good time. The words "one more day" and hated retcons go hand in hand. J. Michael Straczynski's run of Amazing Spider-Man is looked at as one of the best in the wall crawler's history. That run ends after Marvel Comics' Civil War when Aunt May is wounded by an assassin hired by Wilson Fisk to take out Peter Parker. This results in Peter doing everything he can possibly think of to find a way to help her. In the end, it was actually a deal Mary Jane Watson made with Mephisto that saved Aunt May. That agreement ended the marriage between MJ and Peter Parker and destroyed over 2 decades of continuity. The most important part of that was his life with MJ. Not being married to Mary Jane Watson ruined one of the best relationships in comic books and caused ripples throughout Marvel Comics. None of the stories that came after depended on Spider-Man being unmarried, and he's had no memorable relationships that make the idea of an unmarried Spider-Man worthwhile. It actually did a lot more harm than good, turning away many longtime readers of Spider-Man in one go. Spider-Man fans wish this story never happened, and I don't blame them.
The retcon, retroactive continuity. This is basically when a comic book company changes the history of a character or an event in order for it to make sense with whatever story they are now trying to tell, and DC Comics is quite notorious for their use of the retcon. For example, when Batman became the god of knowledge by sitting on the Mobius chair, he became able to find out the answer to any question he asked. One of the first things that he wanted to know was the true identity of his archenemy, the Joker. To his surprise, the chair informed him that the Joker was actually 3 different men. This was never really explored in main continuity, but in the Black Label story, The Three Jokers, we learn that the reason the Joker acts so different depending on the day is that Batman has been dealing with 3 different Jokers, known as the Clown, who was the Joker who took out Jason Todd, the Comedian, the Joker who shot and paralyzed Barbara Gordon, and the Criminal, who seems to be the Golden Age version of the character. The writer Jeff Johns stated that because it was so revolutionary, it would be out of canon with the option of bringing it into the main universe once fans inevitably loved it, comparing his story to Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, which went through a similar process. Now, some retcons are hard to believe, and others are both hard to believe and even harder to keep track of. For example, Hawkman, the whole character. His origins have changed many different times over the character's comic book existence. In his original 1940 origin, he is Egyptian royalty who has been reincarnated throughout time as a variety of different heroes before eventually becoming the archaeologist Carter Hall. When he was reintroduced in 1961, he was now an alien cop from the planet Thanagar named Qatar Hall, who comes to Earth and takes on the secret identity of archaeologist Carter Hall. Now, 2 years later, we learn that these 2 different versions are actually multiversal variants of each other, with the alien living on Earth 1 and the original being on Earth 2. Then in 1986, the Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, and all the worlds are combined into one. So these 2 people were now both Hawkman at different points in history, with the original operating in the 40s and the alien operating in the 80s. Then in 1994's Zero Hour, they make it so that these 2 are just one person. Then in 2011, the New 52 retcons Hawkman so that he is and always has been a space cop from Thanagar. Then in 2017, it's explained that Carter Hall was actually a pharaoh who reincarnates because the knife that he was taken out with in Egypt was made of nth metal from a Thanagarian ship. And then finally, in 2018, it's decided that he can reincarnate not just on Earth, but on different planets as well. But Hawkman isn't the only victim of multiple origin retcons. Another character who got a similar treatment is Donna Troy. The story behind Donna gets more puzzling with each retcon. Donna has been an orphan found and raised on Themyscira as Diana's younger sister, and then she was changed to a creation from part of Wonder Woman's soul, and then she even became a young mirror image clone of Wonder Woman herself. In the pre-Flashpoint era, Donna got a new origin story that completely changed the previous one every couple of decades. It was so confusing that the new Teen Titans had a story arc called Who is Donna Troy from 1988 to 89 to try and clean everything up, but even the story to clean up the character was retconned. In the end, all these separate threads of Donna finally came together, and she was revealed to be an amalgamation of all the Donna Troys across the universe thanks to a spell, with all of her origin stories being memories of her other lives. Now, in one of DC Comics' first and largest moves, the publisher removed all of the parallel Earths that they created during the Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age of comics in the Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was controversial even at the time, as it was a huge move that was meant to streamline their continuity and bring everything into one Earth. Unfortunately, the whole move was pretty pointless because it didn't take DC long to go back on that idea and retcon it, but they did it in what was honestly an incredibly odd way. We're talking comic books here, so there is a large suspension of disbelief that needs to take place, but making Superboy Prime punch reality just seems on a whole other level. Being from an alternate reality himself, he got so mad at the current state of affairs in the DC universe that he punched a hole in reality, which created the multiverse again and started the incredibly complex history of DC continuity, which only recently was reverted so that literally everything is canon if you want it to be. Now, DC's Identity Crisis was a really engaging mystery story that paid great close attention to comic book history, but unfortunately, it is another one of DC's strange retconning events that changed quite a few things that left readers completely flabbergasted. From the super unnecessary use of Dr. Light's attack on Sue Dibney, which was an example of the way women were treated in comic book stories in order to motivate the male heroes, aka fridging, to the Justice League approved mind wipes that seemed kind of evil in the grand scheme of things, there were just some really interesting choices made here. Sure, wiping Dr. Light's mind and turning him into essentially an idiot for what he did maybe seemed darkly justified, but wiping Batman's mind as well? It caused Bruce Wayne to create the Brother MK1 satellite, which eventually became Brother Eye, and created the OMAX. Catwoman also suspected that her personality shift from villain to basically a hero might not have been her own choice, and it caused the villain community to band together over the fear of being mind-wiped, leading Lex Luthor to create the Society, and it even caused the falling apart of the Justice League. But one of the most hated retcons to come out of the New 52 was that DC made it so that the Justice Society of America, a well-respected team that included popular characters from the golden age of comics, that was a huge part of DC comic book history, both in the actual continuity and real life, had just never existed. It's just such an odd choice, as the legacy aspect of DC Comics that these characters served as the basis for was just completely wiped out. That legacy concept had done so well for DC prior to the past decade, so it seemed like a strange choice to make. DC made a few weird choices with regards to the retcons created during the New 52. Some were loved, some were not, but to fans, this one seemed straight up just rude. Just because Jay Garrick and Alan Scott are old news doesn't mean that they aren't as important, because they are. But moving on from that, when Jason Todd first showed up on the scene after the Robin mantle was abandoned by Dick Grayson, it was kind of downhill from the start. DC made Jason Todd's backstory almost identical to that of Grayson himself, with Jason being part of a circus that was attacked by Killer Croc, which resulted in the passing of his parents, and that is when Batman took him under his wing and trained him to be Robin. So already, this Robin seemed to be targeted by Batman for being exactly like his beloved Dick Grayson. In a retcon, he was made to be impulsive, reckless, and rageful, probably because his mentor wanted the old Robin back. Now, his backstory was reworked to make him a tough street kid whose parents succumbed to a life of crime and substances, but that's not the worst part. After his passing at the hands of the Joker and after his resurrection as the Red Hood, Jason revealed to his sidekick that the cause of his streak of white hair was because Batman had made the young Robin dye his hair from red to black in order to make him look more like Dick Grayson and to avoid anyone asking about this new Robin's identity. And sure, that makes some sense, but it makes Batman seem like an absolutely horrible Bat Dad. But going back to the New 52 era for this next point, one of the biggest changes made to the Justice League was that Martian Manhunter was now, in the New 52, not a founding member of the team, a place that the character had held onto for years. Instead, his spot was now taken by Cyborg, who was also now created thanks to a mother box. Now this had a ripple effect of changing the important place that Cyborg held in the Teen Titans as well, and by that, I mean it was erased completely. Now I personally liked the change just a little bit. I always have felt that Cyborg has been a little underappreciated, so to make him a founding member of the Justice League felt like a huge step up for his character, who is one of my favorites. But at the same time, John Jones is also one of my favorites. It's just that his status as a newly arrived alien from Mars made it make more sense that Cyborg, who has lived a relatively normal human life on Earth, should be one of the original defenders of the planet. Now when the DC Universe rebooted into the New 52 continuity, DC changed the continuity so that the Justice League had only been operating for 5 years, and now all the heroes are quite a bit younger. This unfortunately causes some problems, specifically for Batman and his Robins. If they had wanted to start the New 52 with Batman working solo or with Dick Grayson still being Robin, this probably would have worked, but DC wanted a younger Batman while still having characters like Nightwing and Jason Todd. Enter retcons. Grayson and Jason Todd got away relatively unscathed, but Tim Drake got the short end of the stick. Tim was originally introduced after Jason Todd had died at the hands of the Joker. Batman was acting recklessly, and Tim deduced that Batman was Bruce Wayne, and believing that Batman needs a Robin to temper his aggression, he asked Dick Grayson to become Robin again, but ended up getting the gig himself. Well, in the New 52 canon, he never quite figured out Batman's identity and was never actually Robin. Instead, he had just always been Red Robin. And fans hated this, so much that his original origin was eventually put back into canon.
Retcons are now a fundamental part of a team or hero's journey, some more than others. Nightcrawler's origin is a mess that has hopefully been cleaned up for the last time. As it stands right now, Nightcrawler's mother is Destiny and his father is Mystique. Yes, Mystique presents as a woman most of the time, I get that, but this is the MCU that can be easily changed depending on the mutant. Mystique is a very powerful mutant and she isn't a shapeshifter. Well, she is, I'm just trying to be dramatic and make a point. Mystique is a gene shaper. Shape-shifting commonly is changing your body's shape but keeping your inside stuff like your DNA the same. For Mystique, she can alter her inside stuff, so she was able to give herself functioning male reproductive organs and become a father. For the longest time, Nightcrawler's mom was Mystique and his dad was Azazel. Turns out Mystique had relations with Azazel that didn't result in a child, but the relationship made sure she was familiar with Azazel's body so she could easily replicate it when she needed to. Plus, Azazel thinking Nightcrawler was his son was crucial to him not messing with the Earth to the point of destruction because, well, he might not be a great father, but at least he doesn't want to destroy his kid's home planet. Nightcrawler has a lot of parents. Covered here, Mystique, Destiny, and Azazel, but also Mystique was married to Baron Wagner and he thought that Nightcrawler was his, so that's another maybe like half father. Then as covered in part 1, Mystique married Professor X at one point, so that's a stepdad right there. It looks like this whole Destiny and Mystique thing might be the permanent birth story for Nightcrawler, as that's what the original creator intended, but like all things in the Marvel Universe, we just have to wait and see. At this point, Wolverine could write a handbook on retcons and how to come back from the dead. He has everything going for him to not die: indestructible skeleton, powerful healing factor, but sometimes even that isn't enough. But Wolverine is so popular, so you can't kill him. So how is it that he never seems to stay 6 feet under? Well, he travels 6 million feet under and fights the Angel of Death in Purgatory for the right to come back to life. That is so heavy metal. This new info came about in 2008 in Wolverine 48 and was expanded on in Wolverine 58. The issue before this one ends with Wolverine brain dead after a fight that ended up with a bomb on the inside of his body, and the death of his girlfriend, not Silver Fox. This was a different girlfriend way later than that. Like how it happened with Silver Fox, we'll get into later, his girlfriend's passing emotionally destroyed him and his will to live. So when the time came to fight again, Wolverine didn't wanna, which is why he wasn't waking up on Earth. Eventually though, through a series of deaths and deals, Wolverine clawed his way back to the surface. Overall, this retcon is not the worst of this list. It's a pretty good explanation as to why Wolverine is always coming back even if he's been hit with something serious. Surprise! The Phoenix Force is Thor's mom. That's right, the one that X-Men Jean Grey is connected to. That has now been sort of retconned and Thor is once again son of Gaia or Gaia, depends on the person how you want to say it. Though we know that Mother Earth is Thor's biological mom now, there was a moment when we were meant to believe it was the Phoenix Force. The Force claimed Thor as her own and that left everyone shocked, surprised, flabbergasted. At the time, it was like, why did we need that? Now it's kinda like, there are worse things. So the bold statement of Thor, I am your mother, was taken back, but when Thor was a baby, just after Mother Earth had given birth to him, Thor was attacked by a frost giant sword and it literally froze baby Thor. So friend to Mother Earth, the Phoenix Force breathed fire into the child, the fire of life, and now he's okay and has some Phoenix power in him. And he kind of has 3 moms now: Mother Earth, the Phoenix Force, and Freya. Wolverine cannot know peace or anything that has happened in his past. Even we the readers don't know what's real or what's retconnable. Take Wolverine's ex, Silver Fox, now we're getting to her. Like most people close to Wolverine, she passed away in a brutal manner and it was very sad and very hard on Wolverine. She met an untimely end at the hands of Sabretooth, Wolverine's arch nemesis. This death was actually one of the main reasons the pair hated each other so much. So Silver Fox's death was a very big deal until she was retcon revived, not even just as herself, but as a Hydra agent. That's an emotional hit. We learned Wolverine's tragic memories of her death were fake. There was even a fake cabin he was shown to prove it, but then we got the rug pulled again, and this whole thing was retcon again in House of M. Wolverine regains the memory of Silver Fox and Sabretooth. It's real this time. For how long though? I guess we'll never know. The Silver Fox that is a Hydra agent is thought to have been an impersonator or clone, or who knows. One of Wolverine's retcons was so controversial that it never actually panned out. Rumor has it that Wolverine was at one point maybe not a mutant, but really a Wolverine. A Wolverine that had been turned into a human. It's not hard to see why this one didn't make it to the page and why the rumor is hated. It's fun to think about, but it definitely doesn't have the same cool factor that Mutant Wolverine does. If the Wolverine had made it to the page, the idea was that the High Evolutionary would have created him. One of Wolverine's original writers has denied that this Wolverine nonsense was his idea, though he did admit that bringing the High Evolutionary into Wolverine's origin was something that was planned. I'm glad we have the Wolverine we do, and that for the most part he seems to always come back to his mutant status. I am counting this one because the X-Men are heavily involved. Franklin Richards is the son of Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman, and he has been having a bit of an identity crisis, but this isn't the one most teenagers go through. No, his is much worse. He thought he was a mutant and even got onto the exclusive mutant island and made a bunch of friends, only to later discover he wasn't a mutant at all. He was a very powerful kid, just not a powerful mutant kid. Franklin was accidentally making himself appear as a mutant, and when his power got drained, he couldn't do that anymore, and that was when the non-mutant status was discovered. This one sucks because there was so much now unnecessary fighting that happened to get Franklin onto Krakoa. His dad permanently damaged his relationship with Franklin, preventing him from going to Krakoa by masking his X gene. The X-Men and the Fantastic Four destroyed Washington Park. Franklin makes all of his mutant friends, and all of it ends up being for nothing. Hard enough to keep up with as a reader, imagine that being your teenage years. Franklin was considered one of the strongest mutants ever until this big old mess happened, and he's not anymore. This next retcon seems to be a love it or hate it situation. I think it's neat, but a lot of people dislike it for not making a lot of sense in the X-Men universe. Moira McTaggart being a mutant and not a human. Her mutant ability is reincarnation, but the cool kind. Instead of just being reincarnated and needing to start all over again every time, she keeps all her memories and everything she has learned. I think this is neat and explains why she is so smart. But in the 90s, there was that big virus thing, the legacy virus, and Moira was the first human to get it. That was a big deal. Before her, only mutants were affected by the virus. She developed a mutated strain when she got sick. This is important because before, humans were not chill with mutants, but they weren't overly hostile either. Once they learned they could catch the legacy virus, humans got a bit unhinged. Chaos ensued, there was anti-mutant riots, it wasn't cute. That would cause a lot of guilt if she were a human that caused this, but how much guilt is she feeling since now she is a mutant that lied and caused all this just to save herself from being found out? Plus, she gave a sample of the mutated virus. She literally provided a sample, and that sample was studied by great academic minds in detail, and no one clocked that they were looking at mutant DNA. Personally, I'm not a science person in our world, so I am hanging on by a thread when it comes to the MCU, but I feel like that is something that they would have or should have checked in their extensive research. Every once in a while, Marvel does this thing where they take a character that has been a mutant since creation and they suddenly take the mutant status away for whatever reason. Then they're like, how do you feel about that? And we all say we hate it, and 50% of the time it gets fixed. Thankfully, they fixed Wolverine's lupine era. Wolverine had been a mutant basically for as long as we've had him. That all changed in 2007 around issue 50 of Wolverine Volume 3. All of a sudden, Wolverine was not a mutant, he was a lupine, a human descended from wolves. Wolverine was told this by ancient evil Romulus and didn't take it well. Good news is, neither did Wolverine fans. The retcon was received so poorly, Marvel did a double retcon to fix it. In the later comic Wolverine Volume 2, number 312, Romulus' sister Remus ended up literally telling Wolverine that everything her brother said wasn't true and the lupine species was not actually real. There we go. He is out of his lupine era, dead and gone and buried. Okay, listen. This retcon is not the case anymore, but it did happen. At one point, Magneto was actually not Jewish. When he was being investigated by Sabra and everything was found out that the name Eric L was fake, there were hints that Magneto was not Jewish and instead he and his wife were Romani. This didn't go over well with fans, as we were all kind of used to Magneto being Jewish, and pretty soon it was permanently cemented that Magneto was Jewish when he got his actual fleshed out backstory. So now he is definitely Jewish, can't see that changing, but that wasn't always the case in the 90s. Wanda and Pietro are still rocking the boat all these years later, and it is one of the X-Men's most hated retcons ever. Wanda and Pietro are not Magneto's twins. Magneto, you are not the father. This retcon is hated for a variety of reasons, like how the overall story is now messed up, but also many think it had a real world reason for happening. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver made their MCU debut and were going to become major players. Unfortunately, they were already tied to a separate studio. The battle between studios is what many think is the reason Marvel cut the tie between Magneto and the twins so they could be used in the films without ties to the not yet owned X-Men. People like their favorite characters to have a story that makes sense, with decisions made for them that fit in with the rest of the story, not because of a legal battle in the real world. One thing I really want to know because of all of this is if Wanda and Pietro are not Magneto's twins, then who are? We know the babies were born, they were delivered by an evolved cow, that's not something one forgets. Wanda and Pietro found out they weren't related to Magneto almost a decade ago. What happened to Magneto's biological twins? I literally can't find anything on it. Please someone let me know the answer. If you have it, comment down below. It's just a little weird that Marvel hasn't explored that since it's been almost a decade since Wanda and Pietro discovered their father wasn't their father. Maybe they're leaving it open so that they can bring them back in once the X-Men make it to the MCU. I don't know.
For the Incredible Hulk, things rarely go smoothly, and unfortunately for Marvel and its fans, sometimes that includes his retcons. Now, retcons by default erase or make big changes to what previous writers had done with a character or storyline. That's just the way it is. What's a little less common is when a writer basically retcons everything in their run on a character that had been done by the previous writer. Bruce Jones's second volume of the Hulk was a mixed bag. While it lacked on a lot of the smashy breaky bang bang stuff that a lot of Hulk fans liked, it did a lot of work for the psyche and character of Bruce Banner himself. I've seen it compared to the X-Files a little bit. It was controversial, but it was still cool. Well then, Peter David returned to the character for Tempus Fugit, or Tempus Fugit, and he made it so that Nightmare just popped up out of nowhere and revealed that a lot of the stuff in Volume 2 didn't actually happen at all, and it was actually the Hell Lord Nightmare just messing with Bruce's mind for literal years. Fans were pretty peeved about that one, and Tempus Fugit has been accepted as one of the worst Hulk stories in Marvel's catalog. But okay, I think it's important to note that Peter David is not a bad writer at all, especially for the Hulk. Peter David had an amazing 12-year run on Incredible Hulk, but it kind of ended in tragedy, specifically for the character of Betty Ross. In the ending of Incredible Hulk 456, after things had gotten better for Bruce and Betty, the two go to bed only for Bruce to wake up finding Betty covered in huge amounts of cellular damage thanks to radiation poisoning, seemingly from him. She then promptly passed away at 10:39 a.m. on May 9th, and it was kind of doubled down on in Peter David and George Perez's Future Imperfect story, where Betty's ashes are in the possession of the future Rick Jones. But then, the mess began. Peter David and Marvel didn't agree on where Betty's passing would lead for the Hulk, and so Peter was booted off of the Hulk. When Joe Casey came on, Betty's death is almost immediately retconned, with Betty placed in stasis, and the ashes we saw were revealed to be her uncle's instead. Years later, this would eventually lead to Betty being properly resurrected as Red She-Hulk, which is also something that left fans with mixed feelings. Having debuted in the second project in the MCU following Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man, the Hulk is the MCU's longest running hero, but at the same time, his origin and emergence has not been talked about really at all, and didn't seem to matter to anyone in the MCU at all until rather recently. With She-Hulk getting her series, the purple freak Happy Hogan showing up in What If Season 2, hippie surfer dude Scar showing up, which don't even get me started, and possibly the World War Hulk movie coming, Marvel actually very subtly retconned the Hulk's MCU origins. According to Marvel Studios' The Marvel Cinematic Universe and Official Timeline book, Banner became the Hulk in the mid-2000s, 2000s, with the character having been on the run for 5 years at the start of the Incredible Hulk movie, which slightly coincides with a scene from She-Hulk where Banner says he has been Hulk for 15 years, aka since 2010. Who am I kidding? No, the real hated retcon here is absolutely hippie surfer Yogi Scar, just being randomly shoehorned into She-Hulk Attorney at Law. It was so dumb. No. Now retcons are pretty controversial for a few reasons. I think the main two reasons would be that 1, they are just handled really sloppily sometimes, but 2, comic book fans just don't really like change. But change is necessary in comics, especially as time goes on and characters require successors for the existence of our favorite characters to even make sense. Miles Morales is an example of a successor that people actually loved, until he just became a second Spider-Man, which fans still loved. But one successor fans did not love was Amadeus Cho. Now I have to be honest, I actually did like Cho as the totally awesome Hulk. It was fun, and that's enough for me personally, but fun isn't traditionally the Hulk's thing, and it also isn't really the Hulk's thing to pass on his persona to another person. The Hulk title isn't like Captain America's shield or a Spider-Man costume. The Hulk is an alter ego of Bruce Banner, a reflection of his trauma. Sure, the gamma radiation makes sense to be transferred to someone else, but you lose a significant amount of what makes the Hulk by giving it to someone else. So needless to say, Amadeus Cho's time as the totally awesome Hulk didn't really last. Now during the Planet Hulk storyline, Bruce Banner was tricked by his supposed friends, all members of the Illuminati, and was sent to the planet Sakaar, which he then liberated and conquered. Then he mistakenly believed that a device set by the Illuminati had laid low millions of his new people, including his pregnant wife. Hulk came back to Earth and laid waste to those that betrayed him, and brought down everything and everyone who stood against him. Nothing could stop him. He destroyed Iron Man's latest Hulkbuster, wrecked a Zom-empowered Doctor Strange, and had a super intense fight with the Sentry that he technically kind of won. In the end, Hulk was about to destroy the entire planet before Tony Stark called down a combined strike from orbital satellites that finally took down the Hulk. Then, Marvel released Maestro World War M number 3, and basically had Dr. Doom point out that that made no damn sense. Someone proposes to use the exact same kind of orbital satellite death ray to take out Maestro, who is an evil future version of the Hulk, and Doom just kind of scoffs and says it would literally just bounce off of him. Maybe this is more of Marvel poking fun at itself more than a retcon, but still. But this is actually a two-parter. So yes, Marvel kind of called out their own choices with World War M, but the orbital satellite strike itself was actually retconned. The actual conclusion of World War Hulk with the use of the satellites felt very lackluster, with the Hulk basically just giving up and allowing Iron Man to unleash his Deus Ex Machina. So, a few years later, a retcon for that sequence explained that the satellites were actually siphoning off gamma radiation from Hulk's body. While part of this led to the motivation of a faction of Hulk villains, it was also used to explain the creation of the Red Hulk, which people did not like, and it was followed by Red Hulk taking the leading role in a series that was supposed to be about the actual Green Hulk. But also, if Tony had such a crazy anti-gamma super draining weapon, 1, there's no reason to send Banner to Sakaar in the first place, and 2, why did he need to hijack several different countries and even other planets' satellites? It's weird. I don't like it. Now, while I and a lot of comic book fans are actually fans of the Immortal Hulk series and how it brought some significant changes to the character of the Hulk, particularly when it comes to how it is that all these various different Hulks have been able to be resurrected so many times, the run also happened to make some big changes to the origin of the character, and for a lot of fans, you just don't mess with that kind of thing. The Hulk's traditional origin saw Bruce Banner studying gamma radiation, helping to design the gamma bomb. While they were testing the device, Bruce rushed out and shielded Rick Jones, who was in the blast radius, exposing Bruce to massive amounts of gamma radiation. It's very science fiction. Immortal Hulk takes that and also makes it supernatural. Now, gamma radiation has magical elements that weaken the barrier between our world and a hell-like plane that lies below all others called the Below Place, where the One Below All lives. The gamma then allows the One Below All to turn these gamma mutates into his avatars on Earth. Hulk is the greatest of them. Personally, I actually kinda like this one, but I understand why for a lot of longtime fans, they do not. But if we are talking about hated changes to the Hulk's origin, we can 100% look at Original Sin, one of Marvel's most obvious retconning events. In Original Sin, Uatu the Watcher was found deceased on the moon, and then in each subsequent issue, secrets held by the Watcher are revealed that altered various different characters' histories, and led one step closer to the answer to who did the slaying of the Watcher. I'll leave you to find out what the other secrets were, but one of the biggest and most hated was the revelation that Tony Stark was largely responsible for the creation of the Hulk. Essentially, Tony had altered the construction of the original Gamma device. Thanks to Tony weakening the concentration of the device, when the accident took place, Banner ended up surviving his exposure to the intense amounts of Gamma instead of being completely vaporized by it. Fans did not like this, and it kinda makes me wonder how that compiles with the whole Immortal Hulk thing. I don't know. Now, I've talked about Immortal Hulk a few times. It is honestly a bit of a masterpiece. While some people obviously have issues with it, it is widely regarded as absolutely amazing. So how do you follow up something like that? People didn't exactly have high hopes for what came next and how it would measure up. That is, until Donny Cates was slated to write it, with Ryan Ottley illustrating. Then people were excited to see what came next. So imagine everyone's surprise when they immediately chose to ignore Immortal Hulk almost entirely. Hulk was advertised as literally immortal no more, and it completely set itself apart in tone. Immortal Hulk ended with Bruce finally getting rid of his father's influence, and their surviving Hulk personas uniting to inspire Bruce to turn over a new leaf. Hulk starts with Bruce and Hulk back at odds again, and in Hulk number 6, the Betty Ross in Bruce's mind is revealed as Brian Banner, who has somehow infested his son's consciousness yet again. Brian was supposed to be gone for good, and his return means that Bruce is still a prisoner of his past. It's just an odd choice, and the entire run got completely canned after it barely even got started in the first place. Now, for this last point, I want to circle back to Immortal Hulk yet again, but I want to take a different spin on the idea of worst Hulk retcon. For the rest of this list, I had looked at retcons that were pretty vastly disliked by fans. The Immortal Hulk changing Hulk's origin was disliked by fans, but it brought a whole whack of really cool stuff at the same time. One of the coolest things, in my opinion, but one that is the worst because it's terrifying, is how bad things could have gotten for the entire universe if things went the way the One Below All wanted in Immortal Hulk. So the Hulk was retconned to be the avatar for the One Below All. In a possible alternate future, the One Below All would manage to take over the Hulk completely and turn him into a being of unfathomable power and destruction who would go on to destroy every known thing in the entire universe and consume the very essence of said universe. So that when the universe rebooted, the Hulk would end it all before it even started again. That destructive end could have been the Hulk's entire purpose for life, and was luckily prevented from happening thanks to some time shenanigans. But I kinda loved the entire thing. It was super interesting to me.
Do you think that you know who Aquaman is? Did Batman used to run around sending criminals to the grave? Stick around to find out, because today on Top 10 Nerd, we're talking DC Comics retcons. And coming up first today, most DC fans recognize the hero known as the Spectre as one of the most powerful beings in the comic book universe. As a personification of God's spirit of vengeance, Spectre was an ancient force of pure justice, and he is so astronomical in his scope that he requires a human host in order to even be able to comprehend our human nature. One of the first of these hosts was Jim Corrigan, who was resurrected after his passing in order to become the host for the Spectre. But what may surprise some people to find out is that originally, during the Golden Age, Jim and the Spectre were actually just simply the same guy, with Jim just being a detective who would dress up as the Spectre and had some pretty cool ghost-like powers. The retcon here came when DC decided to split the two into two different entities entirely, making the Spectre one of the most powerful beings to exist in their comics. Now, during the first part of this list, we talked about how during the New 52 reboot, DC had altered the Justice League's starting lineup, replacing Martian Manhunter with the Earthbound hero Cyborg. Now, when Cyborg first showed up on the scene, he was a star football player who got extremely injured, which led to his scientist father to merge his body with advanced technology to create the technological hero who then debuted as a member of the Teen Titans. Well, alongside his new debut as a founding member of the Justice League, his origin was also slightly tweaked to have it so that the advanced technology that he was merged with was now a mother box from Darkseid's world of Apocalypse. This was a huge boost up up in his actual power, giving him a huge list of new abilities and making him much more significant in the conflict with Darkseid, who was the one who brought together this team of powerful justice-inclined heroes. And it became the new favorite origin as well, even being the origin shown in Zack Snyder's Justice League live-action movie. But moving on from that, anytime a new Batman movie is set to come out, one of the biggest questions anyone has is who is going to be playing Alfred Pennyworth. Alfred Pennyworth is the key member of the Bat family. Batman may be the Bat family namesake, sure, whatever, but Alfred is the sticky glue that holds them all together. He's a father figure, a mentor, a helping hand, and a dear trusted friend who has been in Bruce Wayne's life from the time Master Wayne was born. Well, what if I told you that actually, no, that was not always true. Back in Batman number 16 from 1943 is when the character of Alfred actually showed up on the doorstep of Bruce Wayne for the first time. Not as a childhood butler of the character, but as a disheveled and disgraced valet who had come to serve Bruce as part of Bruce's father's dying wish. Alfred was a completely new hire for Bruce Wayne. This eventually got retconned to make it so that Alfred had always been with the Wayne family from way back in the day, and I think all of us are very happy that that change stuck around. But sticking with Batman here for a sec, one of the key defining attributes of the Caped Crusader is his no-killing policy. Batman refuses to take a life, even famously repeatedly letting the Joker live despite all the horrible crimes that he continues to commit, even against Batman's own Bat family. Batman just kinda has to believe that these criminals can be rehabilitated. So it's always a shock to fans of the character when they take a look at his earliest comics and see the Dark Knight wielding a 9mm, taking pot shots at criminals left, right, and center. That's right, the Batman, alongside almost all the other Golden Age heroes, had quite the itchy trigger finger. Now, admittedly, this was before the end of World War II, and once that conflict ended, comic books saw a big old conservative crackdown that eliminated Batman's affection for bullets and turned him into the guy who drawed the line at just beating criminals to the very brink of death, but not actually ending their lives, just severely maiming them. But moving on from Batman to another Justice Leaguer, the Flash is one character that I think people don't actually realize had an incredibly tragic life. Like, a lot of stuff has gone wrong for him, with one of the biggest being the passing of his own mother, which was then blamed on his father, who didn't actually do it. For a while, Barry Allen had been wiped out, but actually transported into the Speed Force. So when he returned in Final Crisis and Flash Rebirth, he had a big huge face-off with Eobard Thawne, his most iconic villain, the Reverse Flash. But DC brought a massive change to Eobard's character when they made it so that this time-traveling villain was actually the one to cause almost every single hardship the Flash had ever had, including the passing of his own mom. In Flashpoint Reverse Flash, we actually get to see Eobard traveling into the past and trying to end the Flash, but since he can't do that because he'll create a paradox and he can't take out Iris West, who's Barry's girlfriend or lover, he just decides to go back to Barry's childhood and make Barry's younger days a literal nightmare. He makes the young Barry fall downstairs, he makes him miss catching a baseball, makes him drop all his books and his papers. Eobard even snatched away the one friend that Barry Allen had, erasing him from the time stream completely. It's not funny, but just remembering the look on Barry's face as this full-grown man dressed in yellow just ruins his life, it kinda cracks me up. I'm sorry. Now, have you ever wondered how DC Comics first got their multiverse? When Barry Allen was introduced in 1956 as a reinvention of the Flash, DC explained that in Barry's universe, the original Flash, who was Jay Garrick, and all of his adventures were actually the fictional exploits of a comic book superhero that Barry liked growing up. So, when Barry got powers, he took on the identity of that hero to honor him. This was eventually retconned in the iconic Flash of Two Worlds story from 1961's Flash number 123, where Barry accidentally found himself transported to Jay Garrick's world. He learned that Jay was in a different universe entirely called Earth 2, and that the comics written by Gardner Fox were actually dreams that Fox had remembered and written down. As Barry explained it, quote, "Obviously when the writer was asleep, his his mind was tuned in on Jay's vibratory Earth, which is a weird sentence. Now this was a super weird way to incorporate Jay Garrick back into the real world, but it also had long-running effects on the larger DC universe because this is also the first introduction of the DC multiverse in order to explain all the Golden Age heroes and how they existed at the same time as all the new heroes. But then they created a whole other problem, which is why we got the Crisis on Infinite Earths in order to clear everything up, which it didn't even do. I don't want to get into that though, so we're gonna move on. Now this one is one that I'm not sure if everyone knows about. I think like half the fans know and the other half have no idea. Basically, when Wonder Woman first came on the scene, the character being tied up happened to an increasingly uncomfortable degree. This was because her co-creator, William Moulton Marston, incorporated his, preferences into her stories and powers. Like, infamously, he made Wonder Woman's greatest weakness being tied up or subdued by a man. This was pretty quickly retconned even before the Comics Code Authority cracked down on comics in the 50s. Later writers didn't share Marston's interests and views and felt that Wonder Woman's weird and oddly specific weaknesses were unnecessary, not only unnecessary, but just a tiny bit sexist and humiliating as well. This major DC retcon went unnoticed for actually a really long time until some dedicated readers dug into Wonder Woman's past. But speaking of that, Arthur Curry is Aquaman. He's the guy. When people think of the blonde-haired, golden fish scale wearing hero, they are thinking of Arthur Curry. Or are they? Ooh. Arthur Curry is DC's official Aquaman. That part isn't wrong, but when you look at the Golden Age Aquaman, that is actually not Arthur Curry. That version of the character, who looks basically the exact same, with all the same powers, is actually just some unnamed water-based hero who actually kind of despises us regular Earth humans and fought against the Axis powers during World War II. DC had only introduced Arthur during the Silver Age of comics, and he became accepted as just the guy who had always been Aquaman. As he got more and more popular, DC just kind of quietly swept Golden Age Aquaman under the rug and pretended that they were the same person the whole time. It's actually kind of hilarious because the only reason no one realized was because, I mean, it's Aquaman. No one cared. Now when it comes to the Green Lanterns, John Stewart is pretty universally known as the serious, disciplined one, and that is mainly to do with the fact that he is a retired US Marine. But despite his current gruff, serious, hard reputation, a lot of people forget that when John Stewart first came on the scene, he was actually a pretty rebellious dude who actually had a background as an architect. He was chosen by the Guardians specifically because he was rebellious. Hal Jordan at the time was the Green Lantern's super conservative, serious, main guy lantern, and they chose Stewart specifically to counter him. It wasn't until the animated series that John was finally introduced in the way that we actually know him today. Last but certainly not least today, I have decided to include what may just be the most hated retcon to grace the pages of the New 52 reboot, turning Lobo into Lamo. In Justice League 23.2 Lobo, it was revealed that the Lobo that we know, the big bike-riding, foul-mouthed, regenerating, Gene Simmons-looking space bounty hunter who pretty much every single comic book fan loved, was actually just an imposter. In actuality, a younger, short-haired, boring, generic as hell looking tiny little dude was actually the real, genuine Lobo. And to usher that change in, Lobo #1 gave us this new Lobo beheading the fan-loved version of the character and deactivating his healing factor. Needless to say, no one liked this version of Lobo, and if you did, I don't believe you and you're just saying that to be difficult. Thankfully, the original version of the character was restored to greatness and we can just forget this ever happened. Please.
Well, and get revenge on his father for mistreating him and undervaluing him.